Imagine waking up tomorrow and feeling, not because your problems disappeared, but because you finally stopped carrying what was never yours to hold. No more overthinking what they said. No more worrying about what might happen. No more trying to fix everything and everyone. Light. But let's be honest. How many times have you spent your day stressed, frustrated, or anxious over things you couldn't change? That text you never got. That traffic you couldn't avoid. That outcome you hoped for but didn't get. You try to control it all and end up exhausted. Here's the truth. The more you try to control the uncontrollable, the more you lose control of yourself, your peace, your clarity, your joy. But today, that changes. Today, you're going to discover how to let go, truly let go, and finally find that calm you've been searching for. Not by escaping life, but by facing it with the mindset of a Stoic. A mindset that's been tested for over 2,000 years. These aren't just ideas. They are powerful shifts that will help you take your power back. So take a deep breath and prepare yourself. Because once you understand what you can and cannot control, your whole life will feel lighter. You won't just be learning philosophy, you'll be building freedom. Write this down, say it out loud, and let it sink in. I release what I can't control. I master what I can. Now let's begin. Let's pause for a moment. Not to scroll, not to distract yourself, just to notice something you might never have questioned. How much of your life is actually yours? Think about the choices you've made, the job you work, the way you dress, the things you chase. Now ask yourself, did you choose them freely, or were you following an invisible script written by someone else? This isn't about blame. It's about waking up. Because most people live decades ruled by expectations that were planted in them long before they could think clearly. Expectations from parents, teachers, society, friends, culture, media, all whispering what you should be, how you should live, what success should look like. And here's the twist. These expectations rarely ask if you're happy. They only ask if you're keeping up. This is where anxiety is born, not in reality, but in the pressure to meet standards that aren't even yours. You were not born anxious. You were born curious, playful, free. Anxiety crept in the moment you started comparing yourself to others, the moment you feared disappointing someone, the moment "what will they think" became louder than "what do I want?" These expectations are like software running in the background of your mind, silent, invisible, but constantly draining your energy. They convince you that if you just work a little harder, look a little better, earn a little more, then, finally, you'll be enough. But here's the hard truth. There's no finish line, because the rules keep changing, and the applause never lasts. So how do we get free? First, we need to see where these scripts come from. From childhood, we are told stories. Be a good boy, be a nice girl, get good grades, don't talk back, make us proud. These stories are not always spoken aloud, but they are everywhere. In the praise we get when we conform, in the silence we receive when we question, in the shame we feel when we fall short. Slowly, we learn that love is conditional. Approval must be earned. Worth is measured by performance. And so, the internal voice forms. I must always do better. I must never fail. I must be who they expect me to be. This voice follows us into adulthood. It tells us that if we're not constantly improving, we're falling behind. That if we don't have a partner by a certain age, we're broken. That if we don't achieve success fast, we're lazy. It's subtle but relentless. You go to college not because you love learning, but because it's what people do. You accept a job not because it fulfills you, but because it pays well and sounds impressive. You get married, buy a house, have kids, not always because it's what you want, but because it's the path you were told leads to happiness. But then one day, the truth starts to crack through. You've followed all the steps, and you still feel empty. This is not failure. This is awakening, because freedom doesn't come from checking more boxes. It comes from questioning why the boxes are there in the first place. When you start to question expectations, you reclaim your power. You begin to see that many of the pressures you carry were inherited, not chosen, and you can let them go. Letting go doesn't mean becoming irresponsible or selfish. It means making room for authenticity. It means saying, I will no longer betray myself to meet someone else's standard. That is not rebellion. That is self-respect. Here's what makes expectations so dangerous. They're quiet. They don't shout. They whisper. They dress up as goals, dreams, ambitions, and they sound reasonable. That's why we rarely notice they're controlling us. You might think, I just want to be successful. But what does that really mean? Who defined it for you? Is it wealth, status, recognition, or is it peace, joy, freedom? You might think, I want to be loved. But are you changing yourself to be lovable? Hiding parts of who you are to be accepted? Are you performing a version of yourself that's easier for others to digest? Once you begin to peel back these layers, you realize something profound. Much of your suffering comes not from life itself, but from resisting life because it doesn't match the script. You expected your relationship to last forever. It didn't. You expected to be further along in your career by now. You're not. You expected people to treat you fairly. They didn't. And so you suffer, not because of what happened, but because it didn't happen the way you thought it should. This is the tyranny of expectation. It tells you how things should be and blinds you to how things are. Letting go means rewriting the script, or better yet, tossing it out completely. Because when you stop expecting people to act a certain way, you stop being disappointed all the time. When you stop expecting life to unfold perfectly, you begin to see the beauty in its chaos. When you stop expecting yourself to meet impossible standards, you finally feel enough. This doesn't mean you stop striving. It means you strive differently. You no longer chase to prove your worth. You pursue what truly matters to you. Freedom begins when you realize that expectations are not promises. They are guesses. They are hopes dressed as rules, and you are allowed to change the rules. Think of how many times you've suffered over someone not texting back fast enough, or over not getting the job you thought was perfect, or because someone didn't treat you the way you treat them. Now, pause. What caused the pain? Was it the event or your expectation of how it should have gone? Once you see this, everything changes. You stop blaming life for being unfair. You stop clinging to how it was supposed to be. You start accepting what is. And acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means releasing the resistance that makes life feel heavier than it is. There is a quiet power in this kind of surrender. It doesn't scream. It simply says, "This is outside my control. I don't have to carry it anymore." That's not weakness. That's wisdom. You are not a puppet on a string of other people's opinions. You are not a machine built to meet metrics. You are a human being, capable of choosing your own values. But first, you must become aware of the expectations running in the background. Start small. Notice how you react when things don't go your way. Notice the tension when someone disagrees with you. Notice the panic when you fall behind on some imaginary timeline. Each reaction is a clue, a thread that leads back to an invisible belief about how life should be. And once you see it, you can question it. Who said you have to have it all figured out by 30? Who said success means being busy all the time? Who said being vulnerable makes you weak? So much of your pain is inherited, and you can choose to stop passing it down to others and to yourself. Because here's what nobody tells you: you are allowed to create a new definition of success, one that fits your values, your truth, your rhythm. Maybe for you, success is waking up without dread. Maybe it's having time for your kids. Maybe it's building something slowly and quietly without needing to show it off. Maybe it's simply learning to enjoy your own company. When you release the need to impress, you gain the ability to express. When you stop needing to meet expectations, you begin to meet yourself. And when you meet yourself, fully, honestly, you begin to build a life that feels like home. The people around you may not always understand. That's okay. Your peace does not require their permission. Letting go of expectations isn't about abandoning ambition. It's about shifting the fuel from fear to purpose, from pressure to passion, from proving to simply being. It's the difference between chasing applause and finding contentment in silence. It's the courage to say, I choose me, not the version you want, but the one I am. So take this moment to pause again, not to escape, but to return. To remember that you are not here to perform. You are not here to please. You are not here to be a copy of someone else's idea of success. You are here to live, fully, freely, honestly. And that starts with letting go of what never belonged to you. The invisible scripts, the heavy shoals, the old voices in your head telling you you're not enough. Because you are. Not when you achieve, not when you get it all right, but now, just as you are. You've already spent enough time trying to be who you were told to be. Now, it's time to be who you really are. But even when we let go of expectations, there's something else that sneaks in through the back door, a quiet voice that says, "But it's not fair." That whisper can unravel even the most disciplined mindset, because beneath it hides one of the deepest emotional traps we fall into, the belief that life is supposed to be fair. It shows up when someone else gets what you worked for, when you give your heart to someone and they leave, when you follow the rules and still lose. That sting you feel, it's not always about the outcome. It's about the inner belief that this shouldn't be happening to me. Fairness is an idea that sounds noble, but when misunderstood, it becomes a cage. It tells you that life is a balance sheet, that good behavior earns good results, that effort guarantees success, that kindness will always be returned. But the world doesn't operate by human logic. Nature doesn't hand out rewards based on merit, and life, no matter how disciplined or thoughtful you are, will sometimes break your heart for no clear reason at all. This doesn't mean the world is cruel. It means the world is wild, complex, and beyond complete understanding. And trying to make it follow your personal rules of fairness only creates pain. The more tightly you grip the belief that things should be just, the more resistance you'll feel when they're not. That resistance doesn't change the outcome. It only robs you of peace. Letting go of the illusion of fairness doesn't mean you stop caring about justice. It means you stop personalizing every outcome. You begin to see that what happens isn't always about you, and it doesn't always have a moral scorecard attached to it. Think of all the moments you've held resentment, not because of what happened, but because you thought it shouldn't have happened. That bitterness grows when we expect the world to operate like a vending machine, Insert kindness, receive kindness. Insert effort, receive success. But when it doesn't spit out the expected prize, we feel betrayed. The problem is not the outcome. The problem is the rule we secretly believed in. This shows up in relationships. You give and give, expecting loyalty, and when betrayal comes, it feels unbearable, not just because of the loss, but because it wasn't supposed to end that way. It shows up at work. You work overtime, take initiative, stay loyal, and then someone else gets the promotion. The sting isn't just about career, it's about your internal scoreboard being ignored. It shows up in friendships, family, health. I didn't deserve this. This isn't fair. Why me? But fairness is not a law of nature. It's a human concept, created to make societies function, to help people cooperate, to reduce chaos. It's useful, it has value, but it is not guaranteed. Stoic thinkers understood this deeply. They didn't expect fairness from life. Instead, they trained themselves to respond to whatever happened with wisdom. Epictetus reminded us that some things are within our control and some things aren't, and obsessing over justice in things we can't control only leads to suffering. The goal is not to stop caring about right and wrong. The goal is to stop depending on outcomes for your inner peace. Because if your calm depends on fairness, you'll be anxious for life. You'll live like someone constantly checking the scoreboard, waiting to feel okay. But life isn't a game you can win. It's a reality you must learn to navigate. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means dropping the fantasy that life should follow a script. It's the shift from why me to why not me. Not in self-pity, but in honest recognition that suffering is part of being alive. You start to see others more clearly too. When someone hurts you, you can feel pain without needing revenge. When someone succeeds while doing less, you can observe it without poisoning yourself with envy. You understand that what happens to others is part of their path, not yours. Their rewards, their lessons, their setbacks. They're not about you. Resentment fades when you stop measuring every situation against an invisible ruler. This kind of acceptance builds real power, because if you can stay steady in the storm, you stop being a victim of it. When you don't expect fairness, you stop waiting for the world to validate you. You start creating peace from within. This doesn't mean becoming passive. You can still act. You can fight for justice, speak the truth, protect what matters, but you do it with clarity, not with attachment. You do it because it's aligned with your values, not because you expect a specific result. And that's where true peace is found, not in getting what you think is fair, but in living aligned with your integrity no matter what comes. Think about the energy you've lost to outrage, to unfair outcomes, to obsessing over how someone else's life seems easier. That energy didn't help you. It drained you. But the moment you accept that life will not always be fair, and that this truth doesn't have to ruin you, you get that energy back. You stop wasting it on battles that were never yours to win. You gain presence. You start focusing on what is, not what should be. You become more effective, more aware, less reactive. You respond from your highest self instead of your most wounded parts. It's a powerful thing to be able to say, "This isn't what I wanted. This feels unjust, but I will not let it harden me. I will move forward with grace." And grace is the ultimate strength. You also begin to notice how often the idea of fairness is used to manipulate you. Marketers, media, even relationships often play on this desire for justice. You deserve this. You earned that. Don't let them treat you like that. And sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's bait. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of trying to control external validation instead of developing internal security. Letting go of fairness is not letting go of values. It's rising above circumstances. It's choosing how you respond, no matter what happens around you. Because some people will get more than they worked for, others will suffer more than they deserve. And if you try to make sense of it all through the lens of fairness, you'll break your own heart again and again. But if you accept the chaos of justice, that it isn't always handed out by the universe, you find something better, emotional freedom. You stop needing life to behave. You stop needing every person to act with integrity. You stop needing the timeline to unfold perfectly. You learn to create peace in the middle of the mess, not after it's cleaned up. That's where your strength lives, not in controlling what happens, but in choosing what it means. You begin to focus on what you can influence, your attitude, your actions, your values. And that clarity makes you unshakable, because you're no longer wasting time trying to fix the unfixable. You're no longer waiting for the universe to give you a prize for good behavior. You give yourself the prize, the peace of not needing life to be fair in order to feel fulfilled. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you calm. It doesn't make you indifferent, it makes you wise. You can care without clinging. You can act without expectation. You can love without needing control. Letting go of fairness teaches you to focus on what matters, your character, your principles, your presence. Because when everything feels unfair, the one thing you can always return to is your own alignment. Did you show up fully? Did you act with honesty? Did you stay true to what you believe in? That's the only scoreboard that matters. And here's the quiet reward. The less you chase fairness, the more peace finds you. The less you demand life to match your vision, the more open you become to what it is offering. Sometimes what feels unfair is actually redirection. Sometimes rejection is protection. Sometimes the thing you didn't get is the reason you found something better later. But you only see that in hindsight. And to get there, you need to stay soft in a hard world. You need to let go of the myth that life owes you something and start living as if nothing is promised, but everything is possible. So the next time you feel the heat of injustice rising in your chest, pause. Ask yourself, am I trying to fight life itself? Am I holding on to a rule the world never agreed to follow? And if so, can I let it go? Not because it doesn't matter, but because I matter more. You will find peace not when the world is fair, but when you stop needing it to be. And in that peace, you'll discover a deeper kind of justice, the kind that lives in how you treat yourself, how you care for your own soul, how you walk through an uncertain world with your head high, your heart open, and your spirit unchained. That's real power, and it was never dependent on fairness. It was always yours to claim. When you stop needing life to be fair, you uncover something unexpected. A quieter space inside you. One that's not driven by rules or outcomes, but still isn't quite free. Because even if you let go of expectations and stop chasing justice, there's still one more layer that keeps many people stuck: the need for approval. You may not realize how often your emotions aren't truly yours, how easily someone's tone, reaction, silence, or mood can hijack your peace. You start your day feeling fine, and then someone frowns at you or doesn't reply to your message fast enough, and suddenly your stomach tightens, your confidence dips, your thoughts spiral. It's not always the situation that hurts you. It's the meaning you attach to someone else's behavior. This is what Stoics called emotional echoes. Those moments when another person's feelings or judgments get absorbed into your nervous system like they belong to you. You begin to carry their energy as your own. Their anger becomes your tension. Their disapproval becomes your shame. Their coldness becomes your anxiety. But here's the truth. No one else's reaction is a mirror of your worth. It's a mirror of their own world. People bring their history into every conversation, their wounds, their fears, their moods, and most of the time, their response to you has more to do with that than it ever did with who you are. But if you aren't aware of this, you'll spend your life shape-shifting, adjusting yourself to avoid conflict, chasing reassurance, apologizing for things that aren't wrong, and walking on eggshells in rooms that never asked you to be small. Detachment doesn't mean becoming numb, it means becoming clear. Clear about what's yours to carry and what isn't. Someone frowns, that's data, not a verdict. Someone doesn't like you, that's a preference, not a punishment. Someone criticizes you, that's feedback, not fact. Someone doesn't respond how you hoped. That's their rhythm, not your failure. But your mind will tell you otherwise. Your mind, shaped by years of needing acceptance to feel safe, will quickly turn their behavior into a personal story. They're distant. I must have done something wrong. They're upset. I should fix it. They're cold. What did I say? And now, without realizing it, you're no longer living your life. You're reacting to theirs. This is the prison of approval. You stop being guided by your values and start being guided by other people's reactions. You give up your peace just to avoid discomfort in someone else. But here's what you have to understand. Emotional maturity is not about controlling how others feel. It's about not being controlled by how they feel. You can still care about people, still show compassion, still be aware, but you stop letting their energy dictate your inner state. You stop letting their bad day become your burden. You stop making every silence mean something about you, because if you don't, you'll end up exhausted, always trying to be what everyone else needs, never feeling whole within yourself. The Stoics trained for this by building a kind of emotional firewall, not to keep people out, but to keep clarity in. They practiced observing emotions, not becoming them. They learned to pause between the trigger and the response, creating space for choice. And that's what detachment gives you, choice. Without detachment, you react automatically. You take things personally. You become defensive or withdrawn. But with detachment, you pause. You notice the emotion rising. You question it. You decide, is this mine to feel, or is this theirs? This pause is everything. It stops the emotional echo before it becomes a storm inside you. Think about how much peace you've lost trying to manage someone else's reactions. All the overthinking, all the pretending, all the guilt. It adds up and it keeps you from living fully because you're constantly monitoring everyone else instead of listening to yourself. Detachment allows you to stop rescuing people from their emotions. You realize it's not your job to make others comfortable all the time. You can be kind without being a fixer. You can be caring without being consumed. You can be present without disappearing into someone else's chaos. This applies to criticism too. Just because someone points something out doesn't mean they're right. Feedback is useful, but only when filtered through your own values. If you accept every opinion as truth, you become scattered, uncertain, lost. But when you stand grounded in who you are, other people's opinions become what they really are, reflections of their perspective, not definitions of your identity. This also means releasing the need to be understood all the time. Not everyone will get you. Not everyone will like you. And that's not a problem. It's a reality. Trying to be universally liked is a guaranteed path to self-abandonment. But when you detach from that need, you reclaim your voice. You say what matters even if it's awkward. You hold boundaries even if it upsets someone. You live your truth even if it's misunderstood, because you've stopped using people's reactions as a measure of your worth. This takes practice, especially if you were raised to be a people pleaser. If you learned early on that love was conditional, that approval meant safety, you'll feel tension in your body every time someone is unhappy with you. Your nervous system will scream, "Fix it, please them, say yes." But that urge is not your truth. It's your history. And you are not your history. You are your choices. So choose differently. Start by noticing the small moments, the sigh that makes you nervous, the text that leaves you overthinking, the disapproving glance that lingers in your mind longer than it should. Don't judge yourself for reacting. Just notice. Breathe. Then ask, what am I making this mean? And do I have to? When you do this often enough, your mind begins to relax. It realizes it doesn't have to solve every emotion in the room. It doesn't have to fix what isn't broken. It doesn't have to chase harmony at the cost of your own. You begin to find stillness even when others are storming. This is real peace. Not the kind that waits for perfect conditions, but the kind that holds steady in any weather. And this detachment creates better relationships too, not worse, because you're no longer reacting from insecurity. You're showing up with clarity. You're not demanding others make you feel safe. You're bringing your own safety into the room. This makes your love stronger, cleaner, more honest. Because love that's built on needing approval turns into control. But love that's built on wholeness turns into freedom. You no longer cling to others out of fear. You connect with them from choice. That's a powerful shift. Detachment also makes space for your own emotions. When you're not absorbing everyone else's, you finally have the room to feel your own honestly. You stop pushing down your needs just to keep the peace. You stop sacrificing your truth just to avoid conflict. You stop editing yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. And with that space, your self-awareness deepens. You begin to hear your own voice more clearly. Your decisions become more aligned. Your energy becomes less scattered. Because you're no longer walking through life like a mirror, reflecting everyone else, you're walking through it like a lighthouse. Steady, clear, lit from within. And that inner light helps you see that you don't need constant validation. You don't need to be understood at every moment. You don't need to perform your value. You are allowed to just be. This is not arrogance. This is peace. You will still feel things. You will still care. But you'll care from the center, not the edges. You'll feel without drowning. You'll love without losing yourself. You'll give without disappearing. And the more you practice this, the more your presence changes. People will sense your calm. They'll feel your steadiness. Not because you're perfect, but because you're rooted. You're no longer bouncing between moods, reactions, and fears. You've stepped out of the emotional echo chamber and into your own clarity. That is the gift of detachment. And it was always yours to choose. The moment you stop absorbing what doesn't belong to you, a kind of silence appears. Not the absence of sound, but the quiet you feel when your mind is no longer pulled in 100 directions. But for many people, even in this silence, there is a shadow, a heaviness that doesn't come from other people, but from time itself. Memories that tug, what-ifs that haunt, futures that pressure. It's not always the present that causes suffering. It's being pulled backward or forward while forgetting how to stand still. The mind loves to travel. One moment, you're thinking about what you could have done differently last year. The next, you're worrying about something that hasn't even happened. This constant movement between past and future keeps you distracted from the only place you can actually do anything: right now. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't ignore time, but they refused to be controlled by it. They trained themselves to stay rooted in the present, not in a vague, feel-good way, but in a deeply practical sense, because they knew that the past is fixed and the future is unpredictable. The only true power we have exists in this moment. Regret is one of the most common thieves of peace. It pulls your mind into loops, reviewing old decisions, conversations, mistakes. You replay them, hoping for a different outcome, as if thinking about it hard enough will change the past. But no matter how much you analyze, wish, or punish yourself, the past does not move. What you can change is the meaning you assign to it. Regret often grows when we assume we should have known better, when we hold ourselves to a standard that doesn't account for the person we were back then. But the truth is, you did what you could with what you knew. And if you truly didn't know, then it wasn't a mistake. It was part of learning. Carrying regret is like dragging around an old version of yourself and expecting them to apologize every day. But that version is gone. You are not who you were. And punishing yourself for old behavior does not create growth. It just delays healing. The Stoics didn't believe in erasing the past. They believed in integrating it, using it as fuel for wisdom, not self-blame. Seneca said, "Begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life." Because to them, today wasn't just another page, it was a new book. And then there's the other direction, forward, the anxiety of tomorrow, the need to control what hasn't happened yet. This fear often wears different masks: preparation, ambition, caution. But underneath, it's usually the fear of uncertainty, the discomfort of not knowing what's coming, and the belief that worrying will somehow protect you. But worry doesn't prevent suffering. It only extends it. You end up experiencing pain twice, once in your mind, and again if it ever actually happens. Most of the things you fear never occur, and even if they do, you're often stronger than you thought. The Stoics trained for this with a concept called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, not to scare themselves, but to prepare their minds to face life without flinching. They visualized possible setbacks, not to obsess over them, but to remove their power. If you've already accepted what could happen, then when life unfolds, you're not shaken, you're steady. But they didn't live in those future scenarios. They returned, always, to the present, because the present is the only time where action happens. You can't fix yesterday, you can't control tomorrow. You can only show up now, and showing up now requires attention, full attention, not multitasking, not watching the clock, not mentally listing all the things you should be doing later, but being here with the task, the person, the moment in front of you. Presence isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as feeling your breath in a tense conversation, or choosing to focus fully on the next sentence you read instead of rushing through it. It's noticing your thoughts wander and bringing them back without judgment. When you live in the present, time slows down. You stop rushing towards something. You stop dragging something behind you. You just live, and that's when life starts to feel real again. The problem is that the world encourages the opposite. deadlines, milestones, social comparisons. They all push you to live ahead of yourself. What's next becomes more important than what's now. But that kind of mindset makes peace impossible because there's always something else to chase. So the work becomes unlearning that habit, catching the mind when it runs and gently bringing it back. Not because the future doesn't matter, but because you can't do anything from there. Everything you'll ever do starts in this moment. You also begin to see how much of your identity is shaped by past and future thinking. You say things like, "I'm the kind of person who always," or "I'll be happy when." But those are stories, not truths. The present doesn't care about stories. It only reflects who you are now, not who you were and not who you're trying to become. This gives you power because you realize you're not trapped by your past. You're not dependent on your future. You are free to act, think, change right here. That's what Stoics meant by temporal surrender, not passivity, but deep alignment with the only time that truly belongs to you, the now. And when you practice this often, life starts to feel lighter. You stop waiting for peace to arrive later. You stop negotiating with your happiness. You start finding meaning in ordinary moments, in a conversation, a meal, a walk, a silence, because you're no longer rushing past them. This doesn't mean ignoring your goals or never planning ahead. It means anchoring your mind in the present while aiming forward. It means treating the future like a direction, not a destination you obsess over. You take care of the future by taking care of the now. That's the paradox. The more rooted you are in this moment, the better your decisions, the clearer your thinking, the steadier your path. And that's why Stoics focused so much on awareness, because without awareness, time slips by. You blink and a month is gone. A year passes and you barely remember what mattered. But when you're present, even ordinary moments become sacred. Even quiet days feel full. You stop looking back in regret because you were truly there. You stop fearing what's next because you trust your ability to handle it. This changes your relationship with aging too. You stop counting years as something to fear. You see time not as a threat, but as a container for growth. Because what matters isn't how much time you have, but how present you are in the time you've got. Some people live 80 years but are never really alive. Others live a single moment so deeply that it echoes for a lifetime. Presence makes the difference. You also become more compassionate. When you're present, you listen better. You see people more clearly. You're not stuck in your head while they speak. You're not reacting from old wounds. You're meeting them here, now, and that's rare. That's powerful. Presence is also a form of strength. It keeps you grounded in crisis. It helps you respond wisely instead of impulsively. It makes your inner world stable, even when the outer world isn't. But most of all, it brings peace. Because peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the ability to face them without being pulled apart by the past or future. So, how do you begin? Start by noticing when you leave the moment, when your thoughts drift into guilt, rumination, worry, fantasy. Don't fight it, just notice. Then come back, over and over again. Use your breath as an anchor. Use your senses. Look at your surroundings. Feel the ground. Return. Each time you do, you strengthen your presence. You rewire your mind to stop escaping life and start living it. And in that presence, you find something you didn't know you were missing. Not excitement, not certainty, but something better. Stillness. Stillness is not inaction. It's clarity without noise, movement without chaos, focus without fear. It's when you realize that this moment, right here, is enough. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to compare it. You just need to live it, because this moment is the only one that's truly yours. And now, it begins again. When you learn to live in the present, everything slows down. Your senses return. Your thoughts lose their urgency. Time becomes enough. But then, just as you're starting to feel the calm settle in, a vibration in your pocket breaks it. A screen lights up, a headline flashes, a comment pulls you back in. And just like that, you're no longer here. You're back in the noise. Presence is not only stolen by memory or fear, it's constantly interrupted by the digital world we live in. Alerts, messages, trends, drama, updates. It never stops. And your attention, if left untrained, becomes currency that someone else is spending. This is the new battlefield, and it's not physical, it's mental. The war is not for your time, but your focus. And if you don't guard it, you'll spend your life reacting to things that don't deserve your energy. The Stoics never knew smartphones or social media, but their teachings are more relevant now than ever, because their core practice was mastery of the self in the middle of distraction, temptation, and public noise. The digital world thrives on your emotions. Algorithms don't care about your peace. They are designed to keep you hooked through outrage, validation, comparison, or fear. If you scroll, they learn you. If you react, they feed you more. And soon, your day is not built on purpose. It's built on impulse. Notifications might seem harmless, a beep here, a ping there, but they interrupt the flow of your thoughts. They train your brain to expect interruption. They split your attention into fragments. Even when you're not on your phone, your mind starts checking mentally. Did they reply yet? Did someone like my post? What's the latest update? These mental loops drain focus without you even realizing. The Stoic would pause here and ask, is this within my control? You can't stop the world from being loud, but you can stop giving it power over your clarity. You can decide what enters your mental space. You can stop letting a screen decide how you feel. This begins with awareness. You need to see clearly what the digital world is doing to you. How often do you check your phone with no reason? How quickly do you scroll when you feel uncomfortable? How much of your self-worth is tied to online approval? These are not just habits, they are patterns that shape your mind. Doom scrolling, for example, is not just passive reading. It's feeding the part of your brain that looks for danger. It keeps your nervous system in alert mode. Even when you put the phone down, your mind is flooded with stories of collapse, outrage, disaster, and it starts to feel like the whole world is falling apart. But it's not. The world is complex, with pain and beauty at the same time. You just don't see both if you're only looking at what triggers you. Stoicism teaches discernment, the ability to step back and ask, is this useful? Is this helping me live better? Is this within my influence? Most digital content fails all three questions, but it still captures your attention because it knows how to provoke emotion. The key is not to feel nothing, it's to choose what you allow in. Silencing your phone is not about isolation, it's about boundaries. You don't have to respond instantly to every message. You don't need to comment on every argument. You don't need to watch every video or read every headline. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to protect your peace. The Stoics would train for this by practicing voluntary restraint. They chose discomfort to build discipline. You can do the same with your device. Delay gratification. Skip checking that app. Put the phone in another room when working. Notice the discomfort and sit with it. That small resistance builds strength. Comparison is another toxin the digital world pours into your mind. You see someone's curated highlight reel and forget that it's not real life. You compare your ordinary moment to their staged one, your unfiltered reality to their perfected illusion, and suddenly your life feels smaller. But the Stoic knows that comparison is empty. What matters is your character, not your image. How you live, not how you look. Approval is shallow if it costs you your truth. Online identity becomes a mask people wear. They post not to express, but to impress. They chase likes, not meaning. But every time you seek external validation, you risk losing your internal compass. You start creating for applause instead of alignment. The Stoic reverses this. They act from principle, not popularity. They speak truth, even if it's not trendy. They live privately, even in a loud world. And then there's online conflict. It's easy to get pulled into arguments that don't matter. Someone posts a bad take, and the urge to correct them burns. But what's the cost? Time, energy, peace. The Stoic doesn't need to win every debate. They know that noise is not wisdom. They don't speak just to be heard. They speak when it helps. You don't need to correct every wrong. You don't need to engage every troll. You don't need to prove yourself to strangers. Every time you withhold a reaction, you build inner control. Every time you log off without defending yourself, you protect your center. This doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice. It means choosing the right fight at the right time for the right reason. Stoicism isn't weakness, it's focused power. Power that isn't wasted on every provocation. Digital Stoicism also means choosing inputs carefully. What you read, what you watch, what you consume, these shape your thoughts. If you fill your mind with gossip, fear, outrage, noise, don't be surprised when your peace disappears. Choose content that uplifts, informs, challenges you wisely, not what simply entertains or distracts. You don't need to eliminate digital life. You just need to rewire your relationship with it. Use your tools without becoming one. Be online without losing your mind. Be connected without being controlled. Start by reclaiming your morning. Don't check your phone first thing. Let your mind wake up in silence, not in reaction. Create a morning rhythm that grounds you before the world gets loud. And reclaim your nights too. Let your mind settle before sleep. Give your nervous system space to relax. Peace doesn't visit those who are always plugged in. Use breaks to reset, not to scroll. Take walks without your phone. Eat without distraction. Read something slow. Think for yourself again. Let boredom return, because it's in boredom that creativity awakens. The constant drip of stimulation weakens the muscle of focus. But when you pause, when you rest from input, your depth returns. You don't owe the world constant availability. You don't have to respond immediately. You are not the sum of your screen time. And your value is not in how visible you are online, but in how present you are offline. Digital Stoicism also includes who you follow. Are they helping you grow, or are they feeding anxiety? Are they encouraging thoughtfulness or triggering reaction? You're allowed to unfollow noise. You're allowed to mute drama. You're allowed to protect your space. And when you share, ask yourself, why am I posting this? For meaning, for connection, or for attention? There's nothing wrong with being seen. But it's easy to chase recognition instead of depth. Post less. Reflect more. Speak when it matters. The Stoic path isn't about isolation. It's about intentionality. It's not anti-technology. It's pro-awareness. It's the ability to use modern tools without letting them use you. To build your own mind, not outsource it to the feed. And when you slip, which you will, you don't judge yourself. You simply return. Like breath in meditation, like focus in stillness. You return again and again to what matters, because digital noise will never stop trying. But your inner calm doesn't have to answer the door. Your mind is not a playground for apps. It's your sanctuary. Guard it like one. Keep it clean. Keep it strong. Keep it yours. You already know what it feels like to be distracted. Now it's time to know what it feels like to be free. Not just unplugged, but undisturbed. Not just offline, but truly alive. It begins with one quiet decision: to be present, even when the world begs for your attention. Choose that, and everything changes. The moment you take your attention back from the digital world, something unexpected happens. The noise quiets, but so does your identity, at least the one built through comparison, validation, and constant input. Without distraction, you're left with yourself. And for many, that silence is unsettling. Because when there's nothing left to absorb or react to, you're faced with a much deeper question. Who governs my mind? The world has rules, countries have governments, cities have laws, but very few people think about the structure of their inner world. Most live like open territory, constantly conquered by whatever emotion, opinion, or impulse enters first. But the Stoics taught a different path. A path where you become the ruler of your own mental state, where you don't just react to life, but lead yourself through it with clarity and order. This is what internal citizenship means. The understanding that your soul, your mind, your reason, it's its own nation, one that deserves protection, structure, and guidance, not from others, not from circumstances, but from you. Without this view, you drift. You follow external leaders, hoping they'll give you direction. You follow trends, hoping they'll give you belonging. You follow emotions, hoping they'll give you truth. But all of these are unstable. All of them change. None of them are under your full control. So you must become your own authority. This begins with understanding that you have a responsibility to yourself, not as a burden, but as a form of dignity. You are the only one who lives inside your mind. You are the only one who can shape your thoughts, direct your choices, and discipline your impulses. If you don't take charge of that space, someone or something else will. But this authority is not built overnight. Like any good state, it requires structure. It begins with knowing your principles. What do you stand for when everything else is stripped away? When there's no one watching, no one cheering, no one correcting? What guides you? If you don't have this foundation, you'll bend to the strongest pressure in the room. The Stoics called this your highest reason. It's the part of you that isn't reactive. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It sees clearly, and it doesn't get pulled around by every emotional storm. It's not always loud, but it's steady. You can access it, but only when you slow down and step back from chaos. Living by your highest reason doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It means not being ruled by lower forces, impulse, resentment, vanity, fear. It means noticing those parts of yourself, but not handing them the keys. You don't silence them, you govern them. That's the difference between being emotionally intelligent and being emotionally ruled. One involves listening, the other involves surrendering. You also begin to see that just like a state has boundaries, so must your inner life. You decide what enters your space. Not every opinion deserves a reaction. Not every voice needs to be hosted. You can care deeply without letting others take up residence in your mind. This mental boundary allows you to respond instead of react, and it builds the kind of stability that doesn't shake with every change outside of you. You stop living like an open field, vulnerable to every passing storm. You start living like a grounded home, with doors you choose to open or close. But with this sovereignty comes responsibility. You can no longer blame others for your inner state. You don't get to say, "They made me feel this way." You start to say, "I allowed this feeling to take root." That shift is powerful. It removes you from victimhood and returns you to authorship. You are not helpless inside your mind. You are the architect of your reactions. This doesn't mean you never feel anger, sadness, or fear. It means you don't let those feelings become dictators. You acknowledge them, you sit with them, and then you decide from a place of principle how to respond. In this way, internal citizenship is a daily practice, a constant returning to your values, a constant audit of your alignment. Are your choices matching your beliefs? Are your actions honoring your character? This kind of self-rule also teaches humility, because once you take responsibility for your internal world, you stop needing to control others. You no longer expect them to behave in ways that protect your peace. You create that peace yourself. You stop policing the outer world and start regulating the inner one. And this is what makes true freedom possible. Not freedom from problems, but freedom from dependence. When you lead yourself well, you stop needing life to go a certain way to feel okay. You stop needing people to agree with you to feel confident. You stop needing everything to align perfectly to act with courage. Your inner state becomes your home base, not something you borrow from approval or comfort, but something you generate from within. This also sharpens your decision-making, because you no longer chase things out of fear or emptiness. You ask, does this align with who I'm becoming? Does this serve the inner order I've chosen? If it doesn't, you let it pass, not out of judgment, but because not everything belongs in your territory. You become intentional with your time, your energy, your words. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-committing. You stop overstimulating your mind with things that don't feed your highest self. And in that space, clarity grows. You can hear your own voice again, not the one shaped by pressure or performance, but the quiet, grounded voice of your reason. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't fight for control. It simply guides like a compass, always pointing toward your truth. But this compass can be dulled by distraction, by avoidance, by the habit of looking outward for answers. That's why the Stoics emphasized solitude, not isolation, but reflective silence. Space to hear your own thoughts, space to question your motives, space to recalibrate. In those quiet moments, you reconnect with your sovereignty. You remember that nothing outside you, no success, no failure, no relationship, no conflict, can take away your ability to choose your mindset. That choice is your power, and it is sacred. Because once you understand that your soul is your own state to lead, you stop waiting for permission to live fully. You stop asking others to rescue your confidence. You stop needing the world to be perfect for you to be whole. You rise, not through domination, but through discipline, not by silencing the world, but by mastering yourself within it. And that mastery doesn't come from control, it comes from order, from knowing what you serve, from choosing what you obey. Not emotion, not reaction, but principle. That's the quiet dignity the Stoics carried. They didn't chase honor, they acted with honor. They didn't demand respect, they lived in a way that earned it. They didn't seek freedom from the outside, they found it by ruling themselves well. And that is available to you. Not someday, not when life calms down, but now. Each moment you choose clarity over chaos, you strengthen your state. Each time you pause before reacting, you build your order. Each time you act from value, not ego, you protect your peace. You become the kind of person no storm can shake, not because you control the weather, but because you've learned how to govern the ground beneath your feet. That's what it means to reclaim the sovereignty of your soul. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's real, and it changes everything. Once you begin living as the leader of your inner world, you experience a new kind of clarity. You stop being moved by the noise around you and start choosing your thoughts with intention. You build boundaries, shape your emotions, and act from principle instead of pressure. But in that deep practice of sovereignty, a new obstacle can quietly form, a subtle tension beneath the effort. Not from the chaos outside you, but from your attempt to stay perfectly above it. This is where many seekers of inner peace find themselves stuck. Not because they've failed to detach, but because they've become too attached to detachment itself. The desire to always be composed, always in control, always unaffected, it becomes its own form of pressure, a new standard to live up to, a new identity to protect, a new fear, the fear of falling back into reactivity. This is the paradox of meta-detachment. The moment you begin chasing detachment as a goal, it stops being detachment. It becomes performance. The more you try to force stillness, the more agitated you feel when it slips. The more you hold on to calm, the more tense you become trying to keep it. And slowly, the freedom you were seeking turns into a quiet prison of expectation. Stoic practice was never meant to be rigid. It wasn't about becoming emotionally flat or unreachable. It was about staying grounded in wisdom, no matter the weather. It wasn't a contest to remain unaffected. It was an invitation to engage with life consciously without being consumed by it. When you start attaching your worth to how stoic you appear, you lose the point. Because detachment isn't a badge. It's not a performance. It's a natural byproduct of presence, not a forced behavior. You might notice this in subtle ways. When you get upset and then criticize yourself for not being composed. When you feel anxious and then judge the anxiety as a failure of discipline. When you try so hard to let go that the very act becomes another kind of control. But here's the truth. Trying to let go can easily become another version of clinging. You're still focused on outcome. You're still resisting what is. Only now, the thing you're resisting is your own humanness. Transcending this loop doesn't mean giving up on detachment. It means releasing the idea that you have to detach perfectly. It means allowing yourself to be present with all of it. The stillness and the storm, the peace and the pull, the clarity and the confusion. You stop chasing detachment like it's something to acquire. You allow it to emerge naturally from awareness. If you feel anger, feel it fully without trying to suppress it just to appear centered. If you feel sadness, let it speak before trying to silence it in the name of composure. The point is not to avoid emotion. The point is to be with it in a way that doesn't drown you. True detachment is spacious. It holds room for emotion, thought, sensation, without grasping, without running. It's not numb, it's open. and it's built by surrender, not force. Trying to control your mind into constant peace is like trying to keep a river perfectly still by clamping it down. Peace is not a frozen lake. It's a river you learn to float in. The more you relax, the more buoyant you become. The more you fight, the more you sink. You begin to see that the desire to be free of desire is still a desire. The craving to be calm is still a craving. The hunger to never be triggered is still a form of resistance. And resistance always tightens the mind. So what do? You learn to sit with what is, not with resignation, but with curiosity. When discomfort arises, you ask, what part of me is resisting this moment? What belief is telling me I should feel differently? What story is making this emotion feel wrong? Often, you'll find that underneath the suffering is not the emotion itself, but your judgment of it. You thought you shouldn't feel jealousy because you're practicing detachment. You thought you shouldn't feel fear because you've read enough philosophy. You thought you shouldn't feel frustration because you meditate every morning. But Stoicism never said, don't feel. It said, don't be ruled. That's a very different thing. Being ruled by emotion means reacting without reflection. Being with emotion means observing it without collapse. You can feel rage and still respond with wisdom. You can feel panic and still breathe through it. You can feel grief and still act with grace. And when you allow that space, the emotion moves through you instead of staying stuck. It becomes energy, not identity. This is the heart of meta-detachment. You stop trying to detach from everything all the time, and instead you detach from the need to always be detached. You accept the waves, knowing you don't have to ride every one of them. You allow moments of contraction, knowing they'll pass. You release the tight grip on self-improvement, knowing that growth unfolds best in kindness, not force. This also means letting go of the image you're trying to maintain, the image of being the calm one, the wise one, the strong one. That image is just another costume, and the more tightly you wear it, the more afraid you become of anything that doesn't match it. But peace doesn't come from performance. It comes from permission. Permission to be real, to be in process, to be both grounded and growing. There is no perfect Stoic, no final state of detachment where nothing touches you. There is only practice, moment by moment, of returning to center without punishing yourself for having drifted. And in this return, over and over, you become more rooted. Not because you never wobble, but because you know the way back. That knowledge is power. It's the kind of power that doesn't need to prove anything. It's quiet. It's patient. It watches without clinging. It acts without obsession. It releases without regret. And this kind of presence begins to spread into every part of life. You start detaching from the need to be right in every conversation. You stop overthinking your decisions because you trust yourself to respond well, even if things go differently than planned. You stop fearing discomfort because you know how to meet it without collapsing. And most of all, you stop performing presence and start living it. You walk slower. You speak with more awareness. You notice small details. You're no longer rushing to be enlightened. You're simply participating in life as it unfolds. There's a deep freedom in that, one that doesn't depend on controlling your mind, but on understanding it. When you can say, this moment doesn't need to be different for me to feel whole, you've stepped outside the cycle. You're no longer trying to manage every feeling like it's a threat. You're allowing your humanity to exist inside your discipline. That balance is rare, but it's what makes the Stoic way human, not robotic, not removed. Fully awake, yet unshaken. And that's how you transcend the loop of trying to be free. You stop trying. You just are. When the pressure to be perfectly detached fades, something deeper is uncovered, the real you, without the constant need to manage perception or emotion. But as you strip away these layers, there's another voice that starts to speak. It whispers not about what you're feeling now, but what you failed to achieve before. It brings up every misstep, every rejection, every unfinished goal. And it doesn't just remind you, it tries to define you through it. This is the quiet weight failure carries, not because of what it actually is, but because of the meaning we attach to it. It becomes a label, a name we call ourselves when no one's listening, a filter we see our future through. The truth, however, is far less dramatic and far more freeing. Failure is just feedback, an outcome, a shift in direction. It only has power if you give it a story filled with shame and permanence. It only becomes identity when you forget that all human progress is built on trial, mistake, and movement through unknowns. Stoicism taught that outcomes are indifferent. What matters is not whether you won or lost, succeeded or stumbled, but whether your actions reflected your values, whether your effort was honest, whether your character remained whole. To the Stoic, a failed attempt made with integrity is more admirable than a victory achieved through compromise. This redefines success. It shifts the focus from the result to the internal process, from appearance to essence, from external judgment to inner alignment. Because you cannot always control how things turn out, but you can always choose how you engage with the process. And that is where real freedom lies. The modern world teaches that failure is proof of your limits, that if you fail, you should question yourself, shrink, or delay trying again. But this conditioning traps you. It makes you fear risk. It makes you cling to comfort. And slowly, you begin to choose safety over purpose. But the Stoic chooses differently. They know that fear of failure is often fear of losing status, image, or approval. So they let go of those false attachments. They pursue the right action, even if it doesn't guarantee the right outcome. Because for them, the measure of success is internal consistency, not external praise. You start to realize that failure doesn't say anything permanent about you. It's a moment, a result of conditions, timing, decisions, or unknown factors. And when you remove the shame from it, what's left is a lesson. A clearer view of what to improve, what to release, or what to repeat differently. The more you accept this, the less you avoid trying. Because if failure isn't fatal, if it doesn't reduce you, then it becomes part of your progress. You take more risks. You stop playing so small. You stretch into spaces where growth lives. You also stop comparing your failures to someone else's success. Because you no longer assume that outcomes define value. You understand that everyone is carrying silent attempts that didn't work. And some of the most visible victories are built on layers of invisible missteps. This brings compassion, not just for yourself, but for others too. You stop mocking failure because you understand its weight. You stop judging others by their stumbles because you've learned that stumbling is part of the path forward. It also changes how you view endings. Sometimes things fall apart not because you did something wrong, but because that chapter had finished. A job ends. A relationship shifts. A plan doesn't unfold. The ego says you failed. The Stoic says you lived, you acted, and now the next step begins. You learn to carry endings without turning them into curses. This mindset removes pressure, not because you don't care, but because you stop tying your self-worth to outcomes. You begin to act with boldness, Not because you're sure of success, but because you are rooted in purpose. And that's the kind of confidence that doesn't need a guarantee. Failure becomes neutral when you stop personalizing it. It's not about you being inadequate. It's about the path revealing new information. What worked? What didn't? What needs to change? That's the question. Not what's wrong with me, but what does this moment teach me? And then you move forward, with less fear, with more wisdom. Sometimes failure shows you what no success ever could. It humbles you, it deepens your perspective, it reveals parts of you that ease never touches, it slows you down when speed would have led you astray. It strips away illusions and forces clarity. You also begin to see that failure often redirects you toward a better path, one you wouldn't have chosen without being pushed. But with time, you recognize it as a gift, not in the moment, but in reflection. So you stop fighting failure as the enemy. You start working with it as a companion, one that walks beside every creator, builder, thinker, and leader. One that isn't here to shame you, but to shape you. To live this way, you need to redefine how you talk to yourself. When something doesn't work, don't say, "I'm not good enough." Say, "This version didn't land. Let me try again, smarter." When you're rejected, don't say, "They saw my flaws." Say, "This door closed. Let me look for one that fits better." When you fall short, don't say, "I failed again." Say, "I showed up, I learned, I adjust." This reframing doesn't soften accountability, it strengthens it. Because it removes the weight of shame, which is paralyzing, and replaces it with clarity, which is activating. You also realize that failure feels more painful when your ego is involved. When your identity is built around being seen as competent, successful, or impressive, then every stumble threatens who you think you are. But when your identity is grounded in your values, honesty, persistence, kindness, courage, then failure doesn't shake you. It simply moves you. This shift allows you to recover faster. You don't wallow, you reflect. You adjust your strategy, but you don't shrink your sense of self. You keep your heart open, even when things don't go as planned. And that openness is the real strength. Because many people avoid failure by living half-lives. They never speak up, never launch the project, never love deeply, never risk change. But this kind of safety is a slow erosion of your soul. You become a prisoner to your own caution. The Stoic way is different. It says, dare, not recklessly, but with grounded boldness. Step forward, knowing that some things will work and others won't. But all of it adds to your becoming. Even when you fall forward. You also learn to celebrate effort, not just outcomes. You find pride in your courage to try, in your ability to face discomfort, in your resilience to keep going. You start to measure success not by applause, but by alignment. And then, strangely, you start succeeding more. Not because you fear failure less, but because you trust yourself more. You know you can handle loss without losing yourself. That trust builds momentum. It helps you create more, speak more, share more, lead more. Because you've stopped waiting for the world to approve. You've stopped needing every attempt to be perfect. You've made peace with imperfection. And in doing so, you unlock energy that was once trapped in fear. So the next time something breaks, doesn't work, or doesn't land, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, what does this mean about my actions? What does this not mean about me? Then move forward, a little wiser, a little lighter. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of the road there. And when you stop treating it like a threat, you begin to treat yourself with more patience, more courage, and more freedom than you ever thought possible. That freedom was never about avoiding failure. It was about seeing it clearly and walking on anyway. Once failure is no longer treated as personal, something subtle but powerful shifts. You begin to step into life with more freedom, more courage, less tension. But there's something else hiding beneath the surface, a deeper layer of discomfort that often stays unnoticed until everything familiar begins to change. It's the part of you that silently asks, who am I now that I'm no longer that version of myself? It's one thing to recover from setbacks. It's another to let go of the identity you've built around what you used to do, who you used to be, or what used to define your place in the world. This is where many people get stuck, not in failure, but in the confusion that follows transition. Careers end, relationships shift, roles disappear, and suddenly, the version of yourself you were most attached to no longer fits. This space can feel like loss, even if nothing dramatic has happened, because losing an identity is a kind of quiet grief. It's the grief of no longer recognizing yourself in the mirror or not knowing what to say when someone asks what you do. It's the discomfort of not having a clear label to hold on to when the world asks you to explain yourself. But this discomfort is not the enemy. It's a doorway. Most people define themselves through roles, titles, positions, functions, achievements, relationships. I am a teacher. I am a parent. I am a manager. I am a partner. But these are not identities. They are experiences. They are seasons. They are expressions of your presence at a moment in time. And like all seasons, they change. If you don't understand this, you will cling to outdated roles long after they've expired. You'll try to be the person you were instead of the person you're becoming. You'll resist growth, not because you're afraid of the future, but because you're trying to protect the past. The Stoics taught that everything external is temporary, not just possessions or status, but also identity as it's commonly understood. Who you are is not what you do. Who you are is the presence you bring to what you do, and that presence remains even when the role shifts. This is where resilience is born, because when you stop anchoring your sense of self in labels, you become more adaptable. You're able to evolve without panic. You're able to face endings with grace. You're able to move into new seasons with curiosity, not fear. But that takes practice. It begins with awareness. Start noticing how much of your self-worth is tied to the things you can't always control. Your job, your looks, your relationship, your productivity. Ask yourself, if that role disappeared tomorrow, would I still know who I am? Would I still feel valuable? If the answer feels uncertain, that's not failure. That's a signal. It means it's time to build something deeper, something that doesn't collapse every time life rearranges itself. The Stoics believed that your core identity should be grounded in virtues, not roles. Are you honest? Are you kind? Are you courageous? Are you wise? These qualities don't expire. They don't rely on circumstances. They don't need recognition to be real. They're part of your internal structure, unchanged by external change. So when you lose a job, you're still the same person who brings integrity and discipline to whatever you do next. When your children grow up and leave home, you're still someone who nurtures, leads, listens. When your physical abilities shift, you still carry patience, resilience, insight. You haven't lost yourself. You've lost a surface layer. The depth remains. But to feel this, you need to let go of clinging. Let go of defining yourself through what used to be. Let go of the fear that if you don't have a clear answer to what do, you are somehow incomplete. You are not your last title. You are not your most recent success. You are not your resume, your followers, your performance. You are the one who moved through all of that, with growth, with struggle, with learning. Identity becomes more stable when it becomes less rigid. You start seeing yourself as a collection of evolving traits, not fixed definitions. You become less obsessed with protecting an image and more invested in living with truth. This helps you navigate aging too. In a world obsessed with youth, it's easy to internalize the idea that you lose value as you grow older. But that belief only takes hold if your value was based on appearance, speed, or external relevance. If your identity is built on virtue, then time doesn't erode you, it deepens you. You also stop chasing reinvention just to stay relevant. Reinvention can be empowering, but only when it's rooted in curiosity, not fear. If you're constantly reshaping yourself to keep up, you'll eventually feel exhausted and fake. But if you allow your identity to evolve naturally, led by what feels meaningful, then change becomes nourishing. Relationships shift when you stop needing people to mirror a fixed image of you. You're no longer threatened when others outgrow your expectations. You stop forcing yourself into roles just to avoid disapproval. You accept that connection must grow with the people in it, or it becomes a performance. Letting go of identity roles also helps you forgive yourself. If you've made mistakes in a certain role, you don't have to carry that forever. That version of you is gone. The lessons remain. The guilt doesn't need to. You can own the error without becoming it. And when you meet people, you begin to see them more clearly too. Not just as the roles they play, but as living, shifting, feeling human beings. You connect with their essence, not their surface. You become more patient with their evolution. You stop boxing them into categories. You stop expecting them to remain the same just to make you feel safe. This kind of fluid identity also makes you more creative. When you're not trying to protect who you are, you give yourself permission to explore, to be curious, to start new things without needing to be perfect, to make art, write, speak, share, without needing a label like artist or expert. You start seeing your life not as a single storyline, but as a series of chapters, each with its own texture, lessons, and version of you. Some chapters are loud, some are quiet, some are filled with action, others with reflection, but all are part of the same story, and none of them fully define you. The ability to let go of identity roles doesn't make you vague, it makes you whole. You're no longer fractured between the person you are and the person you're supposed to be. You don't have to abandon yourself to fit in. You don't have to wear a mask to be accepted. You just show up with honesty, presence, and flexibility. This also prepares you for the unknown. Life will change again. Plans will fall apart. Unexpected transitions will happen. But if your identity isn't glued to one version of yourself, you'll bend without breaking. You'll lose things without losing your center, because your identity is no longer held in what you do, but in how you show up to whatever comes next. This kind of inner security is rare, but it's available to anyone willing to stop hiding behind titles, anyone willing to face the fear of being undefined, anyone ready to meet themselves, not as a label, but as a presence in motion. You are not what you've done. You are how you move through what comes, and that no role can ever take away. As you stop clinging to old roles and fixed identities, a certain lightness begins to surface. You start seeing yourself less as a fixed thing and more as an ongoing process. But even in that process, challenges continue. Life still pulls at you. People still test your patience. Unexpected events still trigger old reactions. And even when you know better, your emotions don't always listen. In those moments, what you need isn't more control, it's more space. There's a part of your mind that doesn't react. It doesn't panic. It doesn't get caught in stories or pulled into arguments. It watches. It sees without judgment. It notices everything, but stays still. This part of you is not often loud, but when you learn to access it, it becomes the foundation of your inner strength. The Stoics called it the observer, and training it was one of their most important practices. The observer doesn't stop pain, but it lets you meet pain with awareness. It doesn't erase fear, but it helps you see fear as a wave, not a command. It doesn't silence emotion, but it helps you hold emotion without being carried away by it. Most people go through life reacting. Something happens and their mind moves fast, judging, comparing, defending, planning, regretting. There is no pause, no space, just immediate response. And those responses, when left unchecked, become habits. You get angry without thinking. You shut down without choosing. You spiral into thoughts without questioning if they're true. Over time, those habits become your personality. But personality is not permanent. It is shaped by patterns. And patterns can be retrained, not by force, but by awareness. When you begin to observe your thoughts instead of becoming them, something changes. You no longer believe every idea that appears. You no longer follow every impulse. You stop treating every emotion like a command. You start to separate what's happening from how you respond. This is the witness mind, the part of you that can notice without attaching. You're still feeling, but you're not fusing. You're still aware, but not reactive. You begin to notice how your mind tries to pull you in with judgments, memories, fears. But now you're watching that process, not falling into it. It's like stepping out of the storm instead of yelling at the clouds. The storm still exists, but you're under shelter. You're not at war with your mind. You're observing it with interest. This practice doesn't remove emotion. It creates space around it. And space is what gives you power. When there's space between what happens and how you respond, you get to choose your response. You don't just act, you decide. That choice point is the foundation of calm, not because you never feel triggered, but because you know how to delay the reaction. That delay is where wisdom lives. You can be in a difficult conversation and notice your urge to interrupt, and then pause. You can feel the rise of irritation and observe it without feeding it. You can hear a criticism and feel the sting, but choose not to defend out of reflex. You are no longer a puppet pulled by strings of habit. You've placed a conscious hand on the thread. This inner observer becomes stronger with practice. Start with small moments. When you feel an emotion arise, name it silently. This is tension. This is worry. This is the urge to control. Labeling it creates distance. You're no longer inside it. You're noticing it. That awareness slows the cycle. It gives you a breath. You can also observe your thoughts like clouds passing in the sky. Each one appears, stays, then dissolves. No thought is permanent. No emotion is final. When you see this clearly, you stop rushing to escape or fix. You learn to sit with what's present, without flinching and without clinging. Over time, this changes how you experience life. You stop trying to make every moment comfortable. You stop needing every outcome to go your way. You stop seeking constant distraction or reassurance. You begin to rest inside yourself, even when the world outside is loud. This is not about avoiding action. The Stoic observer isn't passive. It's clear. And from that clarity, right action becomes easier. You speak when it helps, not when you need to prove something. You wait when waiting serves the outcome, not because you're afraid. You set boundaries, not out of anger, but from alignment. The observer doesn't remove your personality. It brings you back to your core. It strips away the noise. It clears the fog. And when the fog lifts, you move with more integrity. You also start to see how much of what bothers you has nothing to do with reality and everything to do with your interpretation of it. The same situation can feel unbearable or manageable, depending on what story you attach to it. The observer allows you to challenge those stories. Is this really an emergency? Is this truly personal? Is this emotion pointing to something useful or just pulling from an old wound? That clarity turns chaos into information. Even pain becomes a teacher. Even discomfort becomes a doorway. This level of awareness also helps you catch the subtle ways your ego tries to protect itself, how it takes offense, demands attention, seeks status. You can watch these moves without indulging them. You no longer need to be seen as right. You no longer need to win every moment. You no longer need to guard every opinion. Because you're grounded in something deeper than ego. You're grounded in presence. Presence is what allows you to hear more clearly, speak more truthfully, act more wisely. It's not mystical. It's a skill. And like any skill, it grows with repetition. Daily moments of silence strengthen it. Reflection sharpens it. Journaling helps you recognize patterns. Breathing gives you an anchor. And choice by choice, you become more stable. Not because life got easier, but because your attention got stronger. And this strength is not tension. It's stillness, not passive, not lazy, but relaxed, aware, unforced. That stillness is what lets you move through difficulty without being swept away by it. The world doesn't stop pulling. People don't stop pushing. But when you train the observer, you stop losing yourself in every tug. You learn to remain, to witness, to choose. That is the core of unshakable calm. It's not a fantasy, it's a discipline, and it's already inside you, waiting to be practiced. The more you strengthen the inner observer, the more you start to notice how often comfort controls your choices. You see it not just in how you react to stress, but in the habits you lean on, the things you avoid, and the subtle ways you try to escape anything that feels unpleasant. Even when your thoughts are calm, your body often seeks what's familiar, predictable, and easy. But growth rarely lives in ease. It lives in friction, in facing small challenges on purpose, in walking toward discomfort, not because you enjoy suffering, but because you're preparing your mind to be free. Stoics understood that the fear of discomfort creates more suffering than discomfort itself. The mind imagines pain and amplifies it. It turns inconvenience into dread and lack into failure. But when you deliberately experience discomfort, you begin to break that illusion. You see it clearly for what it is: temporary, manageable, even empowering. Voluntary discomfort is the practice of stepping outside your comfort zone intentionally. It's not about self-punishment. It's about training your nervous system to stop panicking when life doesn't go your way. By choosing hardship in controlled ways, you prepare for the moments when control isn't an option. The discomfort doesn't need to be extreme. It could be taking a cold shower, going a day without unnecessary spending, sleeping without a pillow, fasting from food or technology, walking instead of driving, or spending time in silence. These small disruptions remind you that you can live with less, that you are not dependent on perfect conditions, that resilience isn't something you wait for, it's something you build. Cold exposure, for example, teaches you how to meet physical stress with mental calm. Your body tenses, your breath shortens, but your mind can soften. You learn to stay present with the sensation instead of running from it. That skill transfers. When anxiety hits, when frustration builds, you've practiced not reacting immediately. You know how to breathe through intensity. Fasting sharpens that same clarity, not just from food, but from anything you usually depend on for comfort. When you take a break from sugar, stimulation, or screens, you feel the urge to reach for them, and then you practice not following that urge. You remind yourself that you are not controlled by craving, that hunger, both physical and emotional, can be observed without being obeyed. Minimalist living offers another kind of discipline. It's not about owning nothing, it's about being free from excess. When you reduce your possessions, your schedule, your digital consumption, you see what you truly need. You learn to value simplicity, to rest in space, to create without clutter. This builds inner stillness because it reduces the noise around you. Voluntary discomfort also helps dismantle entitlement. When you practice going without, you no longer expect life to cater to your preferences. You stop being shocked when things are inconvenient. You stop feeling wronged when plans fall apart. You've trained for disruption, so you move through it with steadiness. This steadiness isn't built through theory, it's built through repetition. Through small, consistent actions that teach your nervous system, I can handle this. I can face challenge without collapsing. I can live with less and still feel whole. These practices build trust. Not trust in the world, but trust in yourself. You begin to believe in your ability to adapt, to endure, to respond wisely under pressure. That belief cannot be borrowed. It must be earned through experience. And that's what voluntary discomfort offers, controlled experience. A way to meet discomfort on your own terms before life forces it on you. A way to rehearse letting go before you're asked to surrender something bigger. Because one day, loss will visit, comfort will disappear, plans will shift. And if you've only ever known ease, the shock will shake you. But if you've practiced living lightly, if you've chosen challenge when you didn't have to, you'll carry a different kind of strength. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or joyless. Stoic life is not about avoiding pleasure. It's about not being ruled by it. When you're no longer dependent on comfort, you can enjoy it more freely. You savor it without clinging. You experience it without fear of its loss. That freedom extends to relationships too. When you're not looking to others to soothe your discomfort constantly, you show up with more presence, more patience, more authenticity. You don't expect others to regulate your feelings for you. You become more resilient in connection, less reactive, more stable. You also learn to reframe discomfort as information. Instead of asking, "How do I avoid this feeling?" you ask, "What is this showing me?" If cold makes you tense, what does that say about your relationship with control? If silence feels unbearable, what thoughts are trying to rise? If boredom sends you reaching for distraction, what are you avoiding inside yourself? Voluntary discomfort becomes a mirror. It shows you where your edges are, where your growth lives, where your freedom is still conditional. And the more you practice, the more those conditions dissolve. You stop waiting for the perfect mood to take action. You stop needing to feel ready before beginning. You start doing what matters regardless of how it feels in the moment. This builds internal authority, a kind of self-leadership that doesn't waver when things get hard. You stop being a prisoner to preference. You become a partner to purpose. The Stoics called this premeditation of adversity, not to invite suffering, but to prepare for it, to meet it with grace, to be someone who can still act with wisdom even when comfort is gone. And in doing so, you begin to feel lighter, not because life is easier, but because you're no longer weighed down by the fear of discomfort. That fear was never about the pain. It was about your belief that you couldn't handle it. But you can. You've trained. You've chosen to feel discomfort before it chooses you. And now, when it arrives, it doesn't break you. It reveals you. By choosing discomfort voluntarily, you loosen the grip of expectation. You stop demanding that life always feel good or go smoothly. You begin to move with greater ease, not because life is easier, but because you've trained yourself to not depend on comfort. That practice opens the door to an even deeper kind of freedom, the ability to use, enjoy, and appreciate things without becoming attached to them. Most suffering doesn't come from what you lose. It comes from thinking you were supposed to keep it forever. The mind becomes tangled not by objects or relationships, but by the illusion that you own them. It wants permanence in a world built on change. It believes possession brings security, and so it clings. But that clinging becomes a burden, a source of fear, and eventually pain. Stoicism offers a very different way to relate to things. It introduces the concept of usufruct, the idea that you are a temporary steward, not a permanent owner. That everything you use, touch, love, or benefit from is borrowed from the world, not guaranteed to stay. You may use it, you may appreciate it, but you do not possess it in the absolute sense. This shift in mindset is subtle, but powerful. It changes how you engage with everything around you, your home, your career, your relationships, your body, even your own time. When you live as a steward, not a possessor, you stop gripping, you stop fearing loss. You begin to experience things more fully because you're not trying to freeze them in place. Enjoyment becomes lighter. There's no pressure to control outcomes. There's no anxiety over holding on. There's just presence, deep, sincere, and without tension. Most attachment is driven by the fear that something good will be taken away. But when you see from the lens of usufruct, you know that all things are already passing through. They come and go, not to punish you, but because that is their nature. You may live in a house for decades, but one day it won't be yours. Someone else will sleep in your room, eat at your table, fill the walls with their own memories. You may build a successful career, but eventually you will leave it behind, either by choice or by force. Even the people you love are not truly yours. They walk beside you for a while, but they are their own beings, moving on paths you cannot control. This isn't meant to be cold. It's a reminder to love more honestly. When you release the idea that someone belongs to you, you stop trying to shape them into something convenient. You start listening better. You appreciate them as they are, not as you wish they'd always be. And when the moment comes to part, whether for a day or forever, you are able to do so with grace, not desperation. Possessing without attachment doesn't mean being indifferent. It means being deeply engaged, but never dependent. You show up fully, but you don't confuse presence with ownership. When you apply this mindset to material things, you begin to live more simply. You keep what you use. You release what weighs you down. You enjoy beauty without needing to collect it. You buy with intention, not insecurity. You stop defining yourself by what you own because you see how quickly those things change hands. There is peace in that perspective. You stop chasing the next upgrade, the next status symbol, the next layer of artificial importance. You stop filling your space with objects that serve your ego more than your purpose. And suddenly, you have room to breathe, room to think, room to live. This clarity also brings more gratitude. When you know that nothing is promised, you stop overlooking what's in front of you. A hot drink, a soft bed, a quiet morning. None of it is owed to you, and yet it is here. You begin to treat every experience as a temporary gift, not a permanent asset. The same approach applies to your body. It's yours to care for, to use wisely, but not to own forever. Aging, injury, change, these are not failures, but natural reminders of impermanence. When you stop demanding that your body stay the same, you begin to respect it for what it is. A vessel, not an identity. A tool, not a trophy. And you treat it with kindness instead of constant critique. This helps you navigate loss too. When things break, change, or end, you don't fall apart. You feel the shift, you allow the sadness, but you don't create extra suffering by saying, "This shouldn't have happened." You recognize that all things come with an invisible condition, temporary use. And so, you let go with dignity. Not because you didn't care, but because you did, fully, honestly, and without illusion. Living this way also sharpens your judgment. You become more intentional with what you say yes to, because you know that every commitment, every object, every person who enters your life brings with it a responsibility of care. When you treat things as borrowed, you become more respectful, more careful, more present. You no longer waste what you don't truly value. You begin to think differently about time too. You stop treating it like something you have in abundance. You see it as the most limited resource and therefore the most sacred. You use it deliberately, knowing that it is not owned, only passed through. This brings urgency, not the anxious kind, but the meaningful kind. You stop putting things off. You stop numbing yourself with distraction. You live with more clarity because you know the clock doesn't pause just because you're busy or afraid. You also relate to change differently. You stop mourning the old version of your life and start meeting the new one with curiosity. You stop clinging to the familiar just because it's safe. You start building a mind that's shaped for the present, not trapped in the past. This helps you lead with less ego. You're no longer trying to defend your territory, impress others, or prove your worth through accumulation. You are rooted in purpose, not possessions. You can succeed without pride, lose without shame, start again without panic, because your identity is not tied to what you hold, it's tied to how you hold it. Usufruct teaches you to walk through life with open hands, to use what's here, to cherish it, to not waste it, but never to pretend it belongs to you forever. This way of living doesn't shrink your joy. It sharpens it. It doesn't limit your ambition. It cleans it of vanity. It doesn't block your relationships. It strengthens them with trust, honesty, and presence. And when the time comes to let go of a person, a position, a possession, you do so without begging the world to stop spinning. You simply say, "Thank you," and you continue walking, unburdened, awake, and ready for what's next. When you stop clinging to what isn't truly yours, something inside loosens. You no longer panic at the thought of losing what you never fully owned. You start moving with ease through change, through endings, through uncertainty. But just as the grip of possession weakens, another grip shows itself. Quieter, deeper, harder to notice. It's not wrapped around what you already have, but around what you want. The next achievement, the next relationship, the next affirmation. This grip is desire, and left unchecked, it can become a form of self-imposed slavery. Desire, in its rawest form, is not evil. It begins as a signal, pointing towards something you care about, something you value. But when desire attaches itself to something outside your control, it quickly mutates into obsession. You start needing things to happen a certain way. You start measuring your peace against what hasn't happened yet. And the longer the desire remains unfulfilled, the more your mind becomes consumed by it. The Stoics warned about this with unrelenting clarity. They saw desire not as a source of joy, but as a chain. A binding force that tricks you into thinking happiness is just one more step away. You crave recognition, thinking it will settle your self-doubt. You pursue status, believing it will secure your value. You chase someone's love, hoping it will fill the quiet fear of being unworthy. And for a moment, when you get what you wanted, it feels like relief. But it's only temporary, because new desires quickly take its place. The mind, once trained to chase, does not rest. It just runs in newer, shinier directions. This is the cycle of craving. You seek, you grasp, you achieve, only to discover that satisfaction fades faster than effort. What once seemed essential becomes ordinary. What once thrilled you now bores you. So you raise the stakes. You want more, better, faster, and without realizing it, you've built a life around hunger, not fulfillment. The problem isn't the object of desire, it's the dependency. When you need something to feel okay, you give it power over you. When your peace is tied to a result, that result becomes your master. You lose your sense of enough. You lose your ability to be still. This slavery shows up everywhere. You want people to approve of you, so you edit your truth. You want success, so you sacrifice rest, health, integrity. You want control, so you micromanage everything, believing chaos will crush you if you don't hold tight. But the more you grasp, the less free you become. Every desire you don't question is a leash around your attention. It pulls you toward the future. It traps you in anxiety. It convinces you that who you are right now is not enough. To unchain yourself, you must begin with awareness. Notice the desires that run quietly in the background of your decisions. Notice how often you say yes, not from joy, but from fear of missing out. Notice how often you perform instead of express. Ask yourself, what am I trying to prove? Who am I trying to impress? What am I afraid will happen if I don't get this? Often, you'll find that beneath the desire is insecurity, a belief that something is missing, that you must earn peace, earn love, earn rest, that unless something external changes, you are not allowed to feel whole. But desire rooted in fear doesn't liberate. It enslaves. It keeps you on edge. It distorts your priorities. It replaces presence with pressure. Letting go of desire doesn't mean becoming empty. It means becoming free. It means moving through the world with intention, not desperation. It means choosing action based on purpose, not need. You can still set goals, still build, still care. But you do so from stability, not scarcity. You pursue growth, not escape. You welcome outcomes, but don't depend on them. This is where desire transforms into preference. A preference allows, it leans in, it aims, but does not cling. A preference says, this would be beautiful, but also says, I'll be okay without it. This shift changes how you move through relationships. You no longer need someone to behave a certain way to feel secure. You stop demanding emotional reassurance every moment. You stop assigning your worth to someone else's attention. You begin to relate from fullness, not need. You offer presence, not pressure. In work, this shift creates clarity. You do what needs to be done without attaching your identity to the outcome. You act from service, not ego. You put in effort, but you don't collapse when things go differently. Your value doesn't rise and fall with metrics or milestones. This also brings rest, real rest, the kind that isn't earned through exhaustion or postponed until success. You stop needing to accomplish something in order to justify doing nothing. You begin to rest as a right, not as a reward. To live this way, you must practice detaching desire from self-worth. You must remind yourself that having less does not make you less, that not achieving doesn't mean you're failing, that someone else's success does not threaten your own. You also begin to redefine freedom, not as having whatever you want whenever you want it, but as not being owned by what you want. Freedom is walking through life with open hands, moving toward what matters, but never needing it to complete you. This mindset allows you to enjoy things more deeply, because you're no longer afraid of losing them. You love people without needing to possess them. You enjoy moments without needing to prolong them. You engage in life without trying to control it. And slowly, the mind stops reaching. It learns to settle, to sit in this moment without demand, to look around and say, "This is enough." That's the kind of wealth that can't be taken. That's the kind of peace desire can't offer. Letting go of desire is not a rejection of life. It's a fuller acceptance of it. It's meeting reality without conditions. It's walking beside your goals without becoming their prisoner. This doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in choices, in daily pauses, in noticing when desire tightens its grip and gently loosening your own. You start to see that true power is not about bending the world to your will. It's about walking through the world unshaken by its turns. Not because you don't care, but because you are no longer controlled. You live, you act, you love, you build, but you are already enough. And that is the freedom desire can never give. When desire loosens its grip, the mind becomes lighter. You begin to breathe differently, speak more freely, act with less pressure. But life is not only about managing longing, it's also about preparing for what might be taken. Even in freedom, loss will come. And even the most detached person will feel pain when something important disappears. The Stoics understood this well. They didn't promise immunity to suffering. Instead, they practiced meeting it before it arrived, so when it did, the shock wouldn't destroy them. They called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This practice isn't morbid. It isn't pessimism dressed as wisdom. It's clarity. It's the courage to look life in the eye and admit that everything you care about could change, end, or vanish at any moment. And rather than waiting for that moment to hit you unprepared, the Stoics trained themselves to mentally rehearse it, to face loss before it happened, not to suffer early, but to suffer less later. Negative visualization is the practice of imagining what could go wrong, not obsessively, but intentionally. You picture the possibility of illness, disappointment, rejection, failure, even death, not to scare yourself, but to build an inner shield. You prepare your emotions so they don't unravel at the first sign of chaos. You rehearse gratitude by realizing nothing is permanent. The practice starts simple. You sit with the thought that the things and people you love most could be gone tomorrow. You don't push away the discomfort. You don't drown in dread. You let it wash through you gently. You feel what that absence might bring, and you sit with it. This is not emotional punishment. It's strength training for the soul. When done with intention, this exercise changes how you move through your day. You start noticing more. You listen more closely. You speak more kindly. You pause before complaining. Because in your heart, you've touched the idea that this person, this moment, this comfort could disappear. And so you treat it with the care it deserves. This doesn't create fear, it creates presence. Because when you're no longer pretending everything will stay the same forever, you stop taking it for granted. You stop acting like you have unlimited chances. You start honoring what's in front of you, knowing it may not return. This kind of presence is not sentimental. It's disciplined. It's anchored in the awareness that life is fragile, but you are strong enough to face that truth. When you practice negative visualization regularly, you're not making life worse. You're reducing the gap between expectation and reality. Most pain in loss doesn't come from the loss itself. It comes from the belief that it wasn't supposed to happen, that it's unfair, that you weren't ready. But when you've rehearsed the possibility, your mind doesn't fight reality, it meets it. You can grieve without collapsing. You can adapt without resentment. You can carry heartbreak without letting it harden you. This mindset also softens your attachment to control. When you've already faced the idea that things might go wrong, you stop micromanaging life. You accept that some outcomes will slip through your fingers, that no amount of planning or effort can guarantee ease, that what matters more is how you respond. And your response becomes more stable, because you're not shocked. You're not outraged that life is being life. You're ready, not cold, but composed. You also begin to detach from trivial problems. The things that once irritated you, delays, slights, inconveniences, lose their weight. When you've mentally stood at the edge of real loss, the small disruptions no longer pull you under. You see what matters. You stop sweating shadows. This clarity shapes your goals too. You stop aiming for things just because they look good. You choose paths that hold meaning, not just success. You act with urgency, not haste. You stop waiting for the perfect time to do what you know matters, because the idea that you have all the time in the world, that's one of the most dangerous lies the mind tells. Negative visualization keeps you honest. It reminds you that time is not a guarantee, that health is not a promise, that relationships are not owed to you. It removes the false sense of safety so you can live more deeply within what's real. It also makes you more generous. When you understand how quickly everything can shift, you start giving more. You say what you need to say. You forgive sooner. You let go of pride. You don't want to waste your time on resentment or ego when everything is this temporary. This doesn't turn you into someone constantly bracing for disaster. It turns you into someone constantly aware of how precious life is. The practice is not about living in fear. It's about training your emotional muscles to respond with wisdom instead of shock. When loss does come, the pain will still arrive, but you'll meet it with familiarity. You've walked through that valley in your mind before. You know the terrain. You can find your footing faster. You don't deny what's happening. You open to it. And because you've prepared, you don't get stuck in what-if spirals. You don't ask, why me? You say, this is what I rehearsed for. This is the moment where my practice becomes real. You also learn to endure smaller setbacks with more grace. When plans fall apart or progress stalls, you don't crumble. You've imagined worse. You've already visited the edge. And now, standing here, you know it's not the end. That steadiness spreads. It becomes part of your tone, your energy, your decisions. Others feel it too. Your presence becomes a calm space in the middle of life's uncertainty. You're no longer rattled by every gust of wind, because you've prepared not just your plans, but your perspective. And still, despite this preparation, you live with softness. The point of visualizing loss is not to harden your heart. It's to deepen your love, to help you show up fully now, because you've seen what it might be like without it. Each time you engage with this practice, you wake up a little more. You pay attention to how someone's voice sounds. You feel the warmth of the sun on your face without distraction. You notice that you're alive, breathing, aware, and that's no small thing. This awareness is not something you chase. It's something you return to again and again by willingly facing what most people spend their lives avoiding. You don't escape the truth. You lean into it, and in doing so, you create a mind that can hold both gratitude and grief, both joy and impermanence, both now and the possibility of not now. That balance makes you whole, and it prepares you not just to survive life, but to meet it with the full strength of your heart, your clarity, and your courage. By rehearsing the possibility of loss, you begin to value what's in front of you with new depth. You stop postponing appreciation. You learn to live with your eyes open and your grip light. But even with this clarity, there's another threat that quietly creeps in, not from what you might lose, but from what seeps into your thinking every day without your permission. Not tragedy, but influence. Not failure, but infection. It doesn't arrive through catastrophe. It arrives through conversation, content, culture. These are the mental contagions that enter silently and slowly reshape how you see the world. Your mind, like your body, has an immune system. It doesn't fight viruses, it fights ideas that don't belong. But unlike the body, the mind often forgets to defend itself. It absorbs what's popular. It adopts what's repeated. It allows the emotions of others to dictate its own weather. If you don't protect it, your mind becomes a mirror, not a lens. It reflects whatever it's exposed to, whether it's wise or destructive. This happens more than you think. You hear someone speak with confidence, and suddenly you doubt your own position. You scroll past opinions that carry outrage, and your calm begins to waver. You listen to gossip, and the way you view someone quietly shifts. No proof, no awareness, just absorption. Not because you're weak, but because the mind is shaped by what it encounters, especially when it's unguarded. Stoics understood this deeply. They taught that protecting the mind is not a passive act. It's a discipline. You don't just react to the world, you filter it. You become responsible for what you allow into your thinking. Just like you wouldn't eat food from a dirty plate, you don't consume thoughts without examining where they came from. Mental contagions are subtle. They don't always shout. Some are dressed as harmless jokes. Others are buried in headlines. Some arrive in the tone of a friend's complaint. Others are hidden in the rhythm of what everyone else is doing. The more you're around them, the more they feel normal. This is how you slowly lose your peace, not in one loud moment, but in the quiet erosion of your values. You begin to guard against this by paying attention to your mental state after every interaction. Who leaves you feeling grounded? Who drains your energy or fills your thoughts with noise? What media leaves you more anxious, more reactive, more distracted? This isn't about building walls. It's about building awareness. You are not a sponge. You are a gatekeeper. To protect your mind, you must strengthen your filters. Start with conversations. Gossip may feel casual, but it's not neutral. When you listen to someone diminish others, your sense of empathy shrinks. You become more cynical, less compassionate. When you join in, even passively, you begin lowering your own standards. What you laugh at becomes what you tolerate. What you tolerate becomes what you accept. Outrage works similarly. It enters through headlines, sound bites, and exaggerated claims. It invites you to react instantly, to judge quickly, to choose a side without reflection. It makes everything feel urgent, personal, catastrophic. And the more you engage with it, the more your mind stays on edge. You can't think clearly when your emotions are constantly hijacked. The Stoic response is to pause. Ask, is this my emotion or someone else's? Is this fact or just opinion wrapped in emotion? Does this topic deserve my time, or is it bait for my attention? Not every fire is yours to fight. Not every voice is yours to echo. Social media amplifies all of this. It's designed to spread emotion, not truth. It rewards extreme takes, not thoughtful ones. You're exposed to hundreds of perspectives, but not all of them are rooted in understanding. If you scroll without awareness, you take on thoughts that aren't yours. You start forming opinions not from reflection, but from repetition. Guarding your mind doesn't mean isolating it. It means choosing its influences carefully. Choose voices that elevate your thinking. Choose silence when noise becomes too much. Choose content that challenges your mind, not just your bias. Choose mentors, books, and ideas that hold you to a higher standard. This discipline also applies to self-talk, because some mental contagions don't come from others, they come from within. Old beliefs, critical inner voices, narratives you never questioned, the thought that you're behind in life, the fear that you're not enough. These are infections of the mind too. They distort your vision, they reduce your confidence, they trap you in loops of self-doubt. To defend against this, you need internal dialogue that is rooted in clarity, not emotion. Practice speaking to yourself as a guide would, not a judge. Replace assumptions with questions. Instead of saying, "I always fail," ask, "What did I learn last time?" Instead of saying, "Everyone is ahead of me," ask, "By whose standards am I measuring?" This clarity becomes your shield. When the world throws opinions at you, you're not rattled. When someone speaks with intensity, you listen, but you don't absorb blindly. You begin to live from the inside out, not the outside in. Mental immunity also requires maintenance. Just like physical health, you can't defend your mind once and assume it's strong forever. You need habits that keep it clean. Journaling to examine your thoughts. Solitude to hear your own voice. Reading that sharpens your awareness. Reflection that brings patterns to light. You also learn to recognize when your defenses are down. Fatigue, stress, hunger, overstimulation. These make you more vulnerable to influence. You start believing what you wouldn't accept on a clear day. So you rest, you step back, you reset. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And when something does get in, because it will, you don't shame yourself. You just notice it. You name it. You remove it like a splinter. No drama, just correction. The mind is not meant to be pure. It's meant to be clear. Not free of all influence, but able to discern what belongs. This discernment is what allows you to stay grounded even in a world that thrives on noise. You begin to live less reactively. Someone's opinion doesn't shake you. A bad mood doesn't define the day. A disagreement doesn't spiral into identity crisis. You have space. You have choice. This kind of mental clarity spreads. It improves how you speak. You don't rush to impress. You choose your words carefully. You don't interrupt with opinions. You listen with full presence. You don't need to win arguments. You focus on understanding. It also shifts how you show up in groups. You're not easily swayed by popularity. You don't adopt behaviors just to fit in. You hold your ground without being aggressive. You walk away from conversations that poison your clarity. Not because you're better, but because you've made a vow to yourself. My peace is not up for trade. This vow becomes a quiet force. You stop chasing drama. You stop chasing attention. You start moving toward what strengthens you, not what distracts you. The stronger your mental immunity, the less life has to control your state. External noise becomes just that, noise, and you, clear and composed, remain anchored. Not because the world is quiet, but because you've learned how to listen selectively. And that, in a world addicted to reaction, is real power. The more intentional you become about what you allow into your mind, the more you notice something else, a kind of noise that isn't just external. It's internal. It's the commentary that never stops, the mental rehearsals, the reactions you prepare before anything even happens. Even when you avoid outside influences, the mind continues to generate its own static. And this mental chatter, if left unchecked, becomes just as draining as any gossip or outrage. There is a deeper kind of discipline beyond guarding your mind from others. It's learning when not to speak, not to respond, not to explain. This is where silence begins to show its power. Silence is not emptiness. It is a choice. A pause. A refusal to give energy to what doesn't serve clarity. In a world that rewards fast opinions, endless commentary, and immediate reactions, silence becomes a radical act. It's not passive, it's strategic. It draws a boundary, not just between you and the world, but between you and the urge to control everything around you. There is a silence that calms, and there is a silence that strengthens. One is for recovery, the other is for precision. Both are essential. Both help you return to a place where your words and actions are guided by reason, not impulse. And the first place that silence must be practiced is inside your own thoughts. Most people believe thinking equals awareness, but overthinking is not clarity. It's confusion disguised as effort. When the mind is busy trying to prepare for every possible outcome, it's not solving problems. It's avoiding presence. It creates stories, predicts danger, analyzes conversations that haven't happened, and simulates scenarios to gain control over the unknown. But no amount of thinking can protect you from life's chaos. And once you see that clearly, silence becomes the more intelligent response. Inner silence doesn't mean you stop having thoughts. It means you stop engaging with every thought that appears. You observe instead of react. You breathe instead of spiral. You let ideas pass without chasing them. This quiet does not shrink your intelligence. It sharpens it. When the noise falls away, insight rises. You begin to distinguish between what's useful and what's just noise in disguise. This clarity extends outward. In conversations, silence becomes a way of listening that changes the energy in the room. You stop interrupting with assumptions. You give space for truth to rise. You no longer rush to fill every gap with your voice. You let pauses exist without anxiety. In conflict, silence can be the most powerful response. Not the silence of passive aggression or withdrawal, but the silence that says, "I do not need to win this moment to be secure." It removes the fuel from arguments that thrive on urgency. It creates a pause that resets tension. It prevents regret. You no longer escalate. You navigate. You also stop offering explanations that are not asked for. You don't rush to prove yourself to people who have already made up their minds. You don't volunteer defenses just to ease discomfort. You know that your value isn't measured by how fast you respond or how well you justify your choices. This saves energy, not just physically, but emotionally. Every unnecessary word, every rushed opinion, every performative answer drains something from you. But silence stores it, holds it, conserves it for when it matters. In relationships, silence creates space for truth to appear. You stop filling emotional gaps with talking that avoids vulnerability. You allow others to express without immediately fixing or solving. You let feelings breathe without managing them. This creates a deeper kind of connection, one that isn't based on words alone, but presence. Social silence also teaches boundaries. You no longer feel the need to be available at every moment, to respond to every message, to comment on every situation. You realize that being silent is not being absent. It's being present with your own rhythm. You step away not to avoid life, but to return to it more fully. Silence also helps break the illusion of control. When something goes wrong, the mind races to respond, to say the right thing, to fix the image, to correct the story. But some things don't need a response. They need your stillness. They need your willingness to let them unfold without interference. This doesn't mean you're helpless. It means you're no longer trying to manage the world through noise. And in that surrender, you gain a different kind of control, not over circumstances, but over your own presence. You start noticing the pressure behind many of your words. How much of what you say is really about soothing your anxiety, maintaining your image, filling space, avoiding silence itself. The silence you practice becomes a mirror. It shows you how often you speak just to be heard, or to avoid being seen too clearly. And when you start holding back, not from fear, but from self-respect, you realize how little needs to be said to be understood. This practice becomes especially important in moments of transition or loss. In the face of grief, no words are enough. In the space between chapters of life, explanations often fall flat. Silence honors what words cannot touch. It becomes a container for experiences that are too sacred, too raw, too personal for language. Silence becomes the language of depth. It also brings you closer to your own truth. In silence, the mind quiets enough to hear what matters, not what's trending, not what's expected, but what's real. You begin to feel your intuition again. You notice what pulls your energy, what restores it, what your next step truly is. And this knowing doesn't shout, it arrives in quiet. That's why noise is addictive, because it drowns out the voice that asks hard questions, the voice that challenges your current path, the voice that calls you back to yourself. Silence may be uncomfortable, but it is also honest. Over time, you begin to feel when words are right and when they are premature. You learn to say less, but mean more. To speak with weight, not volume. To respond with patience, not panic. This isn't silence as avoidance. It's silence as strength. You become someone others trust, not because you talk constantly, but because when you speak, it's clear, considered, and grounded. Your words carry presence. They don't compete for attention. They invite understanding. You also stop rushing to fill silence in others. You don't rescue people from their own discomfort. You let them sit with it, knowing it may reveal something they need to hear. You become a space where people can pause and reflect instead of perform and react. This way of being requires practice. You start small. You pause before replying. You sit quietly at the beginning of your day. You spend time alone without seeking distraction. You end conversations before they lose meaning. You let your phone stay silent when your mind needs rest. And slowly, you find that silence is not empty. It's full of things you've been too busy to notice. Your breath, your body, your thoughts, your intuition, the world moving around you without asking you to shape it. This kind of silence doesn't disconnect you, it reconnects you. It reminds you that not everything needs a response, that not every feeling needs a reaction, that not every question needs an answer right away. It teaches you to trust timing and to trust yourself. Because in silence, you don't escape life. You meet it without noise, without force, with your full presence. When you begin to trust silence, you stop forcing life to deliver answers on demand. You let go of urgency. You create space for clarity to rise without pressure. This surrender opens something deeper, a shift from managing to merging, from resistance to rhythm. Because there is a moment when all your guarding, filtering, reflecting, and letting go lead to one powerful conclusion. Life is not something to battle. It is something to join, not just accept, but love. This is where the Stoic practice of amor fati begins. To accept what happens is already strength, but to love what happens, especially when it is hard, unexpected, or painful, requires something greater. It requires the understanding that events are not mistakes, and that the rhythm of life, even when uncomfortable, is not working against you. It is carrying you toward a deeper alignment. Amor fati means love of fate, not passive tolerance, not reluctant resignation, but wholehearted embracing of whatever arrives, not because you enjoy suffering, but because you trust its role. You see it as part of a larger unfolding. You stop arguing with the moment and start aligning with it. This practice reshapes how you respond to difficulty. When plans fall apart, instead of asking, "Why now?" you ask, "What now?" You don't rush to label things as wrong. You look for their purpose, not from forced optimism, but from grounded awareness that the universe does not owe you comfort, but it does offer growth in every experience. Loving what happens does not mean giving up your will. It means shaping your will to work with what is real. The Stoics never suggested you sit still while storms pass. They taught you to raise your sail to catch the wind, no matter its direction. You become part of the pattern, not a protester against it. This mindset transforms suffering. Instead of being crushed by challenges, you ask what they are calling from you. You see adversity not as punishment, but as pressure that molds you. Every setback becomes a forge. Every obstacle becomes a teacher, not in theory, but in lived experience. Amor fati is not about denying pain. It is about moving through pain with purpose. You feel it, you honor it, but you do not let it make you bitter. You let it carve wisdom. You find the beauty in its arrival. You recognize that even what hurts can lead you to something deeper if you meet it with openness. This also applies to joy. When good things come, you don't cling. You celebrate fully, knowing that joy is also part of the pattern. You don't dull your pleasure out of fear of losing it. You live it while it's here, knowing its presence is just as meaningful as its eventual end. Amor fati removes the illusion of control and replaces it with a sense of cooperation. You begin to understand that not everything needs to be managed. Some things simply need to be allowed. Life is not chaos, it's complexity, and your job is not to flatten it, but to move with it, fully, humbly, and wisely. You stop needing every event to have immediate meaning. You trust that meaning unfolds in time, that even confusion has a place, that even silence is part of the rhythm, that setbacks prepare the ground for what's next. This doesn't remove your effort, it refines it. You still act, you still plan, but you don't resist the feedback of life. If the door closes, you look for the lesson. If the result changes, you adjust your pace. You don't waste time blaming the universe for not reading your expectations. You also begin to live with less fear. If everything that happens is something you can love, then nothing can undo you. This doesn't mean you enjoy pain. It means pain loses its power to define you. You learn to absorb the unexpected with composure. You build emotional agility. You adapt without resentment. In relationships, this practice brings more compassion. People will change, fail, leave, and challenge you. Amor fati doesn't ask you to like all of it. It asks you to stop wishing they were different and instead love what the moment requires from you. Maybe forgiveness, maybe boundary, maybe release. You begin to love the chance to respond wisely, even when others don't. This deepens your sense of humility. You stop expecting life to orbit your preferences. You recognize that your role is not to direct everything, but to show up for what is, with integrity, courage, and heart. You start to live more presently, not hoping for better conditions, not waiting for things to return to how they were, but fully engaging with how they are now. You learn that every moment, even the inconvenient ones, are worthy of attention. You meet life as it is, not as an enemy, but as a partner. This way of living also sharpens your perception. You begin to notice how often resistance is the true cause of your pain, not the event itself, but your refusal to accept it. You stop wasting energy trying to undo reality. You redirect that energy toward how you can grow within it. Amor fati also redefines success. You no longer measure your life by what you get, but by how you respond. A failed project becomes just as meaningful as a victory, because both test your principles, both reveal your character, both offer you a way to become better, more patient, more clear. You stop chasing an ideal life. You start meeting the life you have with respect, not trying to perfect every detail, but trying to live each one as deeply as possible. And with this practice, you cultivate gratitude, not just for the good, but for the whole. You look back at moments you once resented and see how they shaped your resilience. You see the value of what was lost, the meaning inside the mess. Gratitude in the context of amor fati is not about smiling through pain. It's about saying, even this belongs. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because you trust that every season, every shift, every end, and every beginning is connected to something you may not yet understand. You begin to live without flinching. This kind of strength doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender, not to weakness, but to wisdom. You stop asking life to bend to you. You bend with it. You rise when it lifts. You kneel when it presses. You remain when it's silent. You move when it calls. And in that cooperation, life begins to feel less like a battle and more like a dance. Not choreographed, not always graceful, but deeply aligned, because you've stopped demanding. You've started listening. And you've learned to say yes, even when the answer is hard. That yes is amor fati. It is not passive, it is powerful, and it allows you to meet everything, not just with acceptance, but with love. Once you begin to love what happens instead of resisting it, you find a level of freedom that doesn't depend on comfort or certainty. You become someone who can stand still in storms, someone who moves with life rather than struggling against it. But even then, there's one truth most still try to avoid, even after surrendering to change. A truth that ends every attachment, deflates every illusion of control, and places everything into perspective. That truth is death, and facing it, rather than denying it, is not dark. It is the ultimate form of clarity. Memento mori. Remember that you will die. This Stoic phrase is not a warning. It is a return to reality, not to scare, but to awaken, not to crush hope, but to strip away what no longer matters. The goal of this practice is not to obsess over endings. It is to sharpen presence, to remind you that time is limited and most of what we obsess over will not follow us to the end. Most people live as if they will live forever. Their days are spent postponing, proving, pleasing, perfecting, waiting to start what matters, avoiding hard conversations, sacrificing joy for status. But when you reflect honestly on your mortality, all that extra weight begins to fall away. You stop pretending there will always be more time. This reflection does not make you reckless. It makes you real. You begin to act with more care, not less. You speak more truthfully. You waste less energy on arguments that don't matter. You choose your battles wisely. You realize that control was never yours to begin with, and that's where peace begins. Memento mori pulls your attention from the illusion of permanence. You start to see how tightly you've been holding things that were never yours to keep. Your identity, your plans, your expectations, your fears. When death is in view, those attachments don't hold up. They shrink under the weight of what truly lasts, your presence, your actions, your character. Thinking of death is not about being morbid. It's about realizing that what you fear is already happening. Every day is a step closer to your final one. The clock has been running since birth, and instead of running from that truth, the Stoics taught us to look it in the eye and let it guide our choices. This awareness breaks illusion. You stop believing you can control how people see you. You stop acting like your reputation will save you from impermanence. You stop mistaking productivity for meaning. You begin to understand that control is the very thing that keeps you from living. Letting go of control is not defeat. It is liberation. When you stop expecting life to obey your schedule, you begin to live fully in the present. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can manipulate outcomes. You begin to live with lightness because you are no longer trying to carry the impossible weight of holding everything together. Mortality is the great equalizer. It humbles the proud. It softens the stubborn. It reminds you that everything you cling to, everyone you know, every breath you take is on loan. It's not about fearing loss. It's about remembering value. You cherish more when you know it won't last forever. This kind of awareness also sharpens gratitude. You don't need dramatic events to wake up. You don't need a crisis to remind you of what matters. You use reflection as a tool. Every morning becomes a chance to ask, if today were my last, would I be spending it like this? Every decision becomes a chance to honor what's real. You don't chase as many distractions. You stop needing more to feel alive. You become more selective with what you pursue. Not because you're afraid of dying, but because you respect your time. You know that moments spent on things that drain you are moments you don't get back. This mindset creates presence, real presence, The kind that doesn't multitask through conversations, that doesn't delay connection, that doesn't gloss over the beauty in quiet moments. You begin to live slower but deeper. You feel more without being overwhelmed, because you've stopped numbing yourself with control. Memento mori also makes you bolder. When you know you'll die, fear loses its grip. Rejection, embarrassment, failure, they become small in comparison. You realize that the cost of not trying is far worse than the cost of trying and falling short. You speak when it's uncomfortable. You start the project. You write the letter. You forgive. You become more forgiving not only of others, but of yourself. When you see how brief and precious life is, you stop holding on to shame. You stop identifying with your mistakes. You stop living like you have endless time to make peace with yourself. You begin the work now, and you start seeing others differently. You remember that every person you meet is on the same journey. They too are facing impermanence. They too are walking toward an unknown end. Their anger, their mistakes, their defenses, they soften in your eyes. You stop needing them to be perfect. You see their humanity first. This shift brings compassion, not only for the people you love, but for strangers. You become more patient, less reactive. You no longer treat small inconveniences like personal attacks. You remember that time is slipping through all of us, and sometimes the most generous thing you can do is offer grace. You also start showing up for people differently. You say what needs to be said. You offer your attention. You leave less unsaid. Because silence in the face of love becomes a regret when time runs out. Memento mori gives you the courage to say what matters before it's too late. This practice doesn't demand a constant awareness of death. It requires only that you return to it regularly, to check your direction, to realign your choices, to remind yourself that this life, right now, is the only thing promised. And when that becomes real to you, life expands, not because it lasts longer, but because you fill it with meaning, with sincerity, with presence. Control fades because it no longer serves you. It's replaced by participation. You stop trying to hold the river and start swimming in it. You live more truthfully. You love more deeply. You lead with humility. And one day, when your final moment does come, you meet it not with panic, but with peace. Not because you conquered life, but because you lived it, fully, consciously, without waiting for guarantees. That is the gift of remembering death, not an end, but a beginning, not fear, but clarity. When you begin to see mortality as a guide rather than a threat, your grip on control softens. Life becomes something to participate in, not dominate. You stop trying to make time obey your plans, and you begin to honor its flow with presence and honesty. But even as you embrace impermanence, there is still one more layer to refine, a calm that does not depend on outcome, recognition, or reaction. A calm that isn't shaken by what happens outside you. This is where the Stoic concept of apatheia begins to shape a deeper kind of strength. Indifference, as it's often misunderstood, sounds like a lack of care, a turning away, a cold absence of feeling. But what the Stoics meant was something far more powerful. They weren't pointing to disconnection. They were pointing to a kind of disciplined serenity, a posture of the soul that remains upright in both praise and criticism, success and failure, gain and loss. This indifference is not about having no emotions. It's about not being enslaved by them. It's the ability to experience without being consumed, to engage without being dragged, to respond without being ruled. It means remaining committed to your values even when the world around you pulls in every direction. Apatheia is the state of being undisturbed, not because nothing happens, but because what happens does not hijack your clarity. You feel the emotions, but you don't act from them blindly. You witness the situation, but you don't let it define your dignity. You remain steady, not because you're numb, but because you've trained your attention to stay with what matters most. This steadiness begins with choosing what to care about. Most people waste their peace trying to manage opinions, outcomes, or reputations. They want everything to reflect well on them. They want control not just over events, but over how they are perceived. This turns life into a performance. But apatheia pulls you out of that stage. It says, let them speak, let the results come, let the world turn. You remain the same, not out of apathy, but out of alignment. You start measuring value differently. You stop asking what will make you look successful and start asking what will keep your soul clean. You stop chasing applause and begin seeking clarity. You stop adjusting your truth to be accepted and start speaking from what's real. This creates a new kind of confidence, one that does not need constant reassurance. You no longer ride the waves of praise and blame. You no longer adjust your pace every time someone doubts you. You begin to carry yourself with quiet conviction, knowing that your peace comes from within, not from approval. This indifference also protects your energy. You no longer spend hours replaying conversations or worrying about how others interpreted your words. You understand that not every reaction deserves a response. Not every opinion needs a counterpoint. You begin to see that silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. And in that silence, you make better choices. You wait when it's not yet time. You speak when words serve truth, not ego. You walk away when peace is more valuable than being right. You also begin to approach your ambitions with balance. You still strive, you still create, you still pursue excellence, but without anxiety, without neediness, without desperation. You do your work with full presence, but you release the results. You care deeply about the process, but you are indifferent to how others receive it. This protects your creativity. You stop tailoring your voice to be accepted. You start expressing what's real because that's what your soul requires. You begin creating not for validation, but for alignment. You stop asking, will this please others? And start asking, does this reflect truth? Apatheia also changes how you navigate relationships. You no longer need others to agree with you in order to stay connected. You can love without trying to fix. You can be present without losing yourself. You can honor your values without needing someone else to live by them. You don't withdraw from connection, you just stop depending on it to complete you. This reduces emotional volatility. You don't swing from hope to despair every time something shifts. You stop catastrophizing discomfort. You stop romanticizing ease. You live in the middle, with poise, with attention, with grace. You become more reliable, not because you promise everything, but because your actions are not reactive. People know where you stand. They feel your presence as calm, not forceful. You stop trying to win influence through persuasion and begin earning it through consistency. That consistency comes from knowing what is yours to carry. You don't pick up every burden. You don't join every argument. You don't involve yourself in every drama. You stay rooted in your purpose and let the world spin around you. This is not avoidance. It is discipline. And that discipline is built moment by moment. When frustration rises and you don't lash out. When desire pulls and you don't chase blindly. When fear whispers and you don't follow. Each time you choose inner alignment over outer reaction, you strengthen your center. You start seeing this centeredness as noble. Because in a world that rewards performance, being inwardly grounded is a rare form of dignity. You don't need to dominate to feel powerful. You don't need to win to feel worthy. You don't need to impress to feel seen. This kind of nobility is quiet. It doesn't broadcast itself. It doesn't depend on applause. It is content to live in truth, even when unnoticed, because its value is not external. It is intrinsic. You also begin to detach from circumstances, not in coldness, but in trust. You understand that good fortune is not a sign of superiority, and misfortune is not proof of failure. Both are temporary. Both are outside your command. What remains is how you carry yourself within them. That's the soul of apatheia, not to withdraw from life, but to enter it without giving away your serenity at every turn. And when setbacks come, and they will, you meet them without collapsing. You adjust, you respond, you continue. Your center does not break because it was never built on what others gave you. You become someone who is not thrown by delay, rejection, or uncertainty. You move with clarity even when outcomes are unclear. You stay honest even when it's uncomfortable. You remain kind without being naive. This is the strength apatheia offers, not sharp edges, but grounded presence. You no longer confuse indifference with emotional numbness. You understand it as emotional intelligence. It means knowing the difference between what you feel and what you feed, between what you care about and what you give power over you. And over time, this way of being becomes your default, not forced, not performative, simply steady. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to prove every point. You live from a place that is already whole. This is not the death of emotion. It is the maturing of it. You feel more. You just act less impulsively. You hold space for difficulty without being devoured by it. And in that space, your soul breathes freely, not because nothing touches you, but because you've chosen what is allowed to move you. That choice is power. That power is peace. And that peace is what dignifies you, without noise, without striving, without fear. As you grow into a state of steady indifference, not cold but composed, something else begins to shift. You find yourself less rattled by outcomes, less controlled by moods, less reactive to external noise. But there is still one subtle thread that can quietly pull you out of this calm, a desire that hides beneath even your most composed moments, the need to be right. This need doesn't always shout. It doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it sounds like insistence. Sometimes it shows up as correction, masked as help. It's the voice that enters when someone disagrees with you and you feel tension in your chest. It's the inner pull that whispers, prove it, defend it, correct them. Letting go of being right isn't about giving up your intellect. It's about loosening your ego's grip on identity. The more your sense of self is tied to correctness, the more fragile your peace becomes. A single disagreement, a misinterpretation, or a challenge to your opinion can quickly feel like a threat, not just to the idea, but to who you are. This is why so many conversations become battles, why discussions become performances. Because when being right becomes part of your identity, you stop listening. You no longer engage to understand. You engage to win, to confirm, to protect. But what if you didn't need to be right to be at peace? What if being wrong wasn't a loss, but a doorway? What if changing your mind didn't mean weakness, but wisdom? This is intellectual humility, the ability to hold your beliefs without clinging, the willingness to question your views without self-attack, the openness to grow from contradiction, not shrink under it. When you practice this kind of humility, your relationships change. You no longer listen only to reply. You stop rehearsing arguments while the other person is speaking. You begin to hear nuance. You begin to respect difference without needing to fix it. You make space for others, not because you agree, but because you value connection more than control. This also frees your mind. A mind obsessed with being right becomes closed, tense, and rigid. It fears complexity. It avoids ambiguity. But a mind that has let go becomes expansive. It becomes curious. It doesn't fear the unknown. It steps toward it. Curiosity becomes your default. You ask more questions. You assume less. You don't jump to defend when your ideas are challenged. You pause, reflect, explore. And in that space, learning returns. Not the kind that adds to your resume, but the kind that softens you, deepens you, makes you more human. You also stop viewing people with opposing views as enemies. You stop assigning moral failure to disagreement. You recognize that most people, like you, are speaking from a lifetime of experience, wounds, conditioning, and cultural influence. And when you understand that, even the most frustrating opinions become understandable, even if they remain incorrect. This kind of humility does not mean silence. It doesn't mean you stop expressing what you know. It means you hold truth with softness. You don't hammer people with it. You offer it. You share it. You let it stand on its own strength. And if it's true, it doesn't need you to scream. You begin to detach your worth from validation. Whether you are praised or doubted, you remain calm. Whether your point is accepted or dismissed, your ego doesn't panic. You are not your opinions. You are the one who holds them, and you can let them evolve without losing yourself. In arguments, this becomes freedom. You no longer escalate because you've stopped needing to dominate. You step back when the conversation is no longer about truth. You stop talking when more words would only fuel division. You stop proving and start listening. You don't allow your peace to depend on agreement. This shift also improves your judgment. When you are not blinded by the need to confirm what you already believe, you see more clearly. You can admit error. You can reverse a position. You can upgrade your perspective without shame. The mind becomes lighter when it stops holding onto the burden of always being right. That lightness spreads into your tone, your posture, your language. You become less defensive, more thoughtful, less urgent, more intentional. And slowly, conversations change shape. They become spaces for connection, not just correction. You no longer rush to the conclusion. You enjoy the process of learning, of hearing, of exploring. You stay present with complexity. You stop simplifying things just to win quickly. This also helps in inner dialogue. You stop beating yourself up for being wrong in the past. You see how each mistaken belief taught you something. You forgive your former self, not because it was perfect, but because it grew. You stop using old ignorance as a weapon against your current wisdom. Letting go of being right also dissolves tension in your daily life. You don't argue over small things just to feel control. You don't turn disagreements into missions. You let some things go, not because you don't care, but because your peace is more valuable than being declared correct. You start recognizing moments where silence is more powerful than proof, where compassion is more useful than critique, where listening brings more healing than explanation. You also stop being embarrassed by not knowing. You ask for help. You admit confusion. You say, "I'm not sure," without feeling small. And this openness invites others to do the same. You create space for shared discovery. The fear of being wrong often comes from the belief that knowledge equals worth. But when you release that link, you stop performing intelligence. You live it. You become a student of life, not a self-appointed teacher. You begin to seek understanding instead of victory. And when you are in a position to share what you know, you do so with gentleness, not because you doubt your insight, but because you've learned that humility makes truth easier to receive. You stop speaking from a mountaintop. You speak from level ground. That level ground is where the deepest peace grows, because it is where ego loosens and sincerity returns, where minds connect not through power, but through openness. You realize that there is no lasting peace in being right if being right means being alone, unyielding, and closed off. True peace lives in flexibility, in the willingness to grow, in the strength to let go of needing the last word. So you speak clearly, but not loudly. You listen without waiting for your turn. You let ideas rise and fall without needing to hold them tightly. You allow truth to emerge through exploration, not domination. And through this practice, you gain something more powerful than control: presence. Not because you always know what to say, but because you no longer need to prove it. That is the freedom intellectual humility offers. And it begins when you stop needing to be right and start choosing to be real. Once you stop needing to be right, something much deeper unlocks, not just in how you relate to ideas, but in how you relate to people. Conversations become less about control and more about connection. You stop proving, stop persuading, stop managing every opinion. But there's another layer still hiding under the surface, the urge to correct not just thoughts, but lives, the need to step in, offer advice, fix what's broken, protect someone from themselves. It looks like care, it feels like love, but often it's control disguised as kindness. This is where the art of non-interference begins. It's not indifference, it's trust. It's the practice of giving others the dignity to navigate their own experience without you constantly reaching in to rearrange it. It's understanding that growth cannot be forced from the outside, that wisdom cannot be transferred by instruction alone, that love, when bound by control, becomes burden. Most people interfere from good intentions. You see someone making what looks like a bad decision, and your instinct is to jump in, redirect, prevent the pain. But sometimes that pain is the very thing that will open them. Sometimes the fall is what will finally teach them to stand. Sometimes your attempt to rescue is what blocks their responsibility. Letting others live doesn't mean abandoning them. It means knowing where your role ends. You offer presence, not pressure. You support without steering. You stand beside, not above. You let others make choices, even when they're messy, slow, or hard to watch. This practice begins by examining your reflex to fix. Ask yourself, am I offering help because they asked for it, or because I feel uncomfortable watching them struggle? Am I sharing advice because it's needed, or because I feel powerless when I'm not in control? Am I trying to protect them, or am I protecting my own anxiety? Often, what looks like guidance is actually a way of calming your own discomfort. You want to feel useful, relevant, needed, so you step in, you explain, you solve. But in doing so, you rob the other person of their own path. You send the subtle message that they are not capable, that their journey must be shaped by your logic, that their process is wrong unless it looks like yours. Non-interference requires humility. You must accept that you don't always know what's best for someone else, that your wisdom may not apply to their timing, that they may need to move through pain you've already resolved, or pain you never had to face. You must let them find their own rhythm, even if it runs opposite to yours. This shift creates space. In that space, respect grows. You begin to see others not as projects, but as people. Not as puzzles to solve, but as sovereign beings with their own lessons to learn, their own timing to honor, their own choices to make. You also begin to trust life more. You stop acting like you're the only line of defense between someone and disaster. You start believing that the same force that shaped you can shape them, that life will teach what it must, that the truth will arrive when it's ready, that your silence is not neglect, it's faith. Letting others live also frees you, because when you stop managing everyone's path, you return to your own. You reclaim the energy once spent monitoring other people's outcomes. You stop carrying guilt that was never yours. You stop trying to earn love through usefulness. You remember that your worth is not tied to how much you can fix. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without attachment. You show up without controlling. You love without hovering. You offer help only when it is truly welcome, not when it soothes your ego. Boundaries become clearer. You stop offering advice when none was asked for. You stop giving time when it drains you. You stop inserting yourself into dynamics that are not your responsibility. You start asking, what am I responsible for in this moment? And just as importantly, what am I not? When you live this way, your relationships become more honest. People feel safe around you, not because you always have the answer, but because you don't demand control. They don't feel judged. They don't feel watched. They feel seen. This creates deeper trust. When someone knows you won't overstep, they open. When they know you won't try to take over, they lean in. Paradoxically, the less you try to fix, the more connection you create. And when the people you care about suffer, you stop trying to interrupt their process. You sit with them. You listen without solving. You let silence speak. You stop looking for ways to remove the pain and instead learn to hold space for it. That space becomes the most powerful kind of support. Letting others live also helps you face your own patterns. You begin to see that the urge to interfere comes from old places, perhaps from needing control in childhood, or feeling responsible for keeping the peace, or believing your worth is measured by your ability to help. When you stop interfering, you're not just respecting others, you're healing yourself. You begin to separate love from control. You understand that love doesn't always mean guidance. Sometimes it means stillness. Sometimes it means letting someone fail. Sometimes it means letting them leave. And all of that can still be love. This also changes how you raise children, lead teams, support friends. You move from authority to presence. You stop telling people who to be. You start inviting them to become who they are. You model integrity rather than demanding obedience. You inspire through action, not advice. And when you do offer guidance, it comes from clarity. It lands better because it's not constant, it's not loud, it's not wrapped in urgency, it's timed, it's thoughtful, it respects the person on the other side. This practice will test your patience. You'll watch people move slowly. You'll see mistakes you've already made. You'll want to speak when silence is wiser. But each time you step back, you strengthen your trust in the process, not just theirs, but life's. You begin to live in alignment. You don't force growth. You water the soil, provide light, and let the seed emerge on its own terms. You stop digging it up just to check if it's sprouting. And over time, your own peace deepens. Because your sense of control fades, your need to oversee fades, your habit of rescuing fades. What remains is respect for yourself, for others, and for the timing that life holds. You become someone who supports without suffocating, who listens without lecturing, who loves without possessing. You learn that the highest form of care is sometimes simply standing still beside someone as they find their own way. That is not absence, that is presence, disguised as restraint, rooted in wisdom, carried by love. Letting go of what you can't control isn't giving up, it's finally stepping into your own power. You've now walked through the illusions we carry and the invisible scripts we follow. You've seen how fairness, desire, identity, and even our obsession with being right can quietly steal our peace. You've learned how silence grounds, how discomfort strengthens, how detachment clarifies, and how love doesn't always mean interference. This isn't theory. This is a roadmap to freedom. A life where you no longer beg the world to align with your preferences, but instead align yourself with nature's rhythm. Where you don't just endure change, you embrace it. Where you don't just survive challenge, you grow through it. Let go of what you can't control. Master what you can. Your thoughts, your values, your response. That's where your peace lives. That's where your strength begins. If this journey stirred something in you, if even one idea helped you see your life a little clearer, drop a comment below. Share the lesson that hit the hardest, or simply write, "I choose calm." I read every comment, and your words matter here. If you found value in this content and want more guidance on how to build a resilient, grounded, and unshakable mind, make sure you subscribe and tap the notification bell. There's more to learn, and we'll grow through it together. Now go live, not by gripping harder, but by letting go smarter.